Chapter 368. Starting today, the monthly votes will be doubled. Canvas votes, canvas votes. Please give me the monthly votes in your hands. Put your palms together and salute. I will also pretend to be an ascetic. Xia Qifei left Jiangnan restaurant and stood in front of the main street. Looking at the people passing by in the night, he couldn't resist lowering his head slightly, thinking about something. Big brother. Outside the building, a dozen men surrounded him. They looked at him with a glimmer of respect and unfamiliarity and bowed respectfully. These people were all good hands of the Jiangnan water bandits. Because of the palace treasury bidding, they had followed Xia Qifei into Suzhou. However, Suzhou had always been heavily guarded. Some of these water bandits were even on wanted posters, so normally they would not enter Suzhou. These people had not expected that they, as bandits, could not only openly wander through Suzhou, but that their leader could even sit at the same table as the wealthiest large merchant families in Jiangnan. Normally, those merchants would only use silver to buy the lives of their brothers to fight. How could they be as polite to Brother Xia as they were today? Thinking of this, a sense of vanity and pride rose in the hearts of these men. The way of the world was indeed different from before. Looking at his subordinates' faces filled with panic and joy, Xia Qifei couldn't resist laughing at himself and saying, "Brothers, you all have to learn more. This time you've also seen those old teachers. When you have free time, ask those teachers for guidance." The teachers in these words were the old officials of the Ministry of Revenue that imperial envoy Xia Qifei had sent to help him win the bidding. The Jiangnan water bandits were gradually developing in the direction of trading. Xia Qifei also hoped that his trusted subordinates could quickly grasp the skills of doing business. At least they had to know how to do accounts. Amidst the joyous and harmonious atmosphere, Xia Qifei suddenly felt a glimmer of coldness. He raised his head and looked. The bright moon was in the blue dome of the night. It was still spring, so the nights on sunny days were indeed a bit colder. Pulling back his gaze, he saw three strange people standing on the opposite side of the street. The reason why he said these three people were strange was that they had appeared out of nowhere and looked coldly at the street. They were not tourists returning home at night, nor were they guests seeking pleasure after drinking. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, but the person in the middle was wearing a conical hat. On a night like this, he seemed a little special. Having mingled in Jianghu for many years, he had struggled between life and death since he was a child. Xia Qifei had no time to react. The chill in his bones and his intuition for danger made a cold light shoot out of his eyes. With a strange cry, the tips of his feet pushed off the ground 3 times, and his entire body floated toward the door of the Jiangnan restaurant. When the tip of his foot touched the ground, the person in the middle of the 3 people across the street placed his hand under the bamboo hat on his shoulder, grasping something. Then, a snow-like blade light sprinkled down, chasing after Xia Qifei's body that was treading on the water like a water bird, chopping down. Kill. When the blade light flashed, the Jiangnan water bandits also reacted. Relying on the bravery in their bones, they wanted to stand between their big brother and the soul-chasing blade light. However, their reactions could never catch up to the blade light of the man in the bamboo hat. Only the trusted aide closest to Xia Qifei let out a wild roar and pulled out the straight knife hidden in his clothes. He channeled his strength through his arms and used all his strength to block. With a crisp crack, the straight knife in the hands of the water bandits was like a tender lotus root in Jiangnan. It was cut in half by the blade light. With a loud crash, the man's body was split into 2 by that extremely violent saber strike, turning into 2 pieces of horrifying flesh and blood. Blood spurted out, and internal organs spilled all over the ground. The 2 hands that had already been separated were still holding the hilt and the tip of the saber, powerlessly and miserably defending themselves. The power of the blade did not stop. In the quiet night, it had already reached the front of the Jiangnan restaurant, in front of Xia Qifei, whose toes had just touched the ground. The energy of the blade was like a straight line, cutting people when it met people, cutting the ground when it met ground. With a swish, it broke through the green stones on the street, revealing the fresh stone stubble within. With a loud boom, Rocks flew in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, and dust rose. With a roar, Xia Qifei's two palms came together to meet the indomitable power of the blade. The blade light suddenly faded, and the dust gradually settled. Two streaks of blood spurted from Xia Qifei's nostrils. His hands trembled in front of his body, and he looked with terror at the man in the bamboo hat on the opposite street. This wild blade had come across a long street, cut through a person's body, and caused him internal injury. What kind of terrifying realm was this? He was probably already a 9th-level master. How could there be such an unfamiliar top master in Jiangnan? The wild and unreasonable blade cut through the night sky. After a moment of silence, everyone finally saw the man in the bamboo hat. The man in the bamboo hat was tall, and his entire body exuded a stern and cautious aura. He held a long blade in his hand. The blade was as bright as snow, and the hilt was extremely long. It was a long blade that could only be seen on stage or on the battlefield. This blade was 8 feet long, and no one knew how he had managed to hide it behind his back earlier. All of this happened in the time it takes for a spark to fly off a flint. After Xia Qifei desperately blocked this blade, he blinked. In the blink of an eye, he discovered that the situation was somewhat terrifying because the two people beside the man in the bamboo had disappeared without a trace.
He didn't know where they had gone.
Since the opponent had come to kill him, the two of them would definitely not sit idly by. In reality, just as the man in the bamboo had pulled out the long blade on his back and valiantly chopped down across the street, the other two aces beside him had already floated up, avoiding the group of Jiangnan water bandits in the middle of the street. Their bodies were like flying swallows, forming two beautiful arcs. Like two dark arrowheads, they pierced towards Xia Qifei's location. Using the long blade as a mountain of thunder, concealing the combined attack of two swallows flying at the same time, if nothing unexpected happened, the panic-stricken Xia Qifei should have already died in that moment. The reason he did not die was because when Xia Qifei barely managed to block that blade, a new change had already occurred on the long street. When the Jiangnan water bandits moved in front of Xia Qifei to block him, there were 4 people in this group of men who very strangely moved to the sides. Then, when the 2 aces who swept past like swallows wanted to dodge to the sides, these 4 people flipped their palms and pulled out metal drills from under their long robes, stabbing them horizontally. It was a very clean, simple, and neat stab, but it just so happened to land on the chests and abdomens of the 2 aces. They had no choice but to dodge. These 4 people were the assassins of the 6th Bureau that Fan Xian had hurriedly sent over tonight. Perhaps the skill of the 6th Bureau assassins was not as good as the 3 aces who had come to kill tonight, but their judgment of the current situation and the possible routes that the other party would choose to kill had a natural sensitivity. Thus, they blocked the 2 swallows that the other party had intended to kill together. Ding, 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 ding. In an instant, countless light and crisp sounds rang out on the street in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. They were densely packed, as if they would never stop. It was as if a storm of hail had suddenly descended on the bright and beautiful city of Suzhou in spring. 2 swallow-like aces held 2 short swords in their hands. There was poison on them, and they glowed in the darkness. The 4 6th Bureau assassin swordsmen held iron rods in their hands. They were also poisoned and blended into the darkness. A moment later, a number of muffled grunts seemed to ring out at the same time. The 2 aces who had come to kill Xia Qifei dejectedly swept back across the street. There were a dozen cuts on their clothes from the metal rods. Some of the cuts were deep and seemed to have broken through their skin. On the 6th Bureau side, they had also paid a heavy price for this. One person's left hand had been neatly sliced off, revealing the bone inside. Another person's shoulder had been stabbed with a knife. A strange color began to appear in the fresh blood, and one person had already fallen into a pool of blood. The 2 sides had just met face to face, and both sides had suffered irreparable losses. No one knew what kind of danger there had been in those tinkling sounds. Even after suffering such heavy injuries, the 6th Bureau assassins only let out 2 muffled grunts at most. Their willpower and determination were not something normal Jianghu people could compare to. The three people who could still move ate the antidote pills made by the third bureau as they tried to retreat and shrink the defensive circle. They had to protect Xia Qifei's life. The two swallows who had retreated across the street did not seem to have thought that there would be such a group of professional assassins by Xia Qifei's side, and that they had also suffered significant injuries. The two of them looked at each other and knew that the other side was definitely someone from the Overwatch Council. No matter which faction, they all knew the terrifying extent of the Overwatch Council's poison. Not everyone could withstand the poison that Sir Fei Jie single-handedly took care of. Thus, the two of them cleanly turned around and rose. The tips of their feet pushed off the wall and swept into the night sky, immediately disappearing. They were all true aces and assassins of the Jiangnan martial world. Today, they had been entrusted with the task of killing Xia Qifei, but they could not bear to bury their precious lives here. In the distance, a light sound came from the dark alley. Two of the three masters on the opposite side of the street had left, but Xia Qifei felt that his situation hadn't improved at all. In fact, the pressure he was under was even greater, because that long saber, the long saber that could only be seen on the stage, had already charged at him again when the two sides were fighting intensely. Before the knife, there was not a single enemy. Under the knife, there would not be a complete corpse. Like splashing snow, the knife light dismembered, separated, and beheaded the brave and respectable water bandits, creating a path of blood. Amidst the sky full of flying limbs, it came closer and closer to Xia Qifei. Seeing his brothers die wretchedly on the long street, hearing the soul-shaking sounds of knives and wretched cries, smelling the thick scent of blood, and seeing the man in the bamboo hat step through the blood, the man walked with such determination and stubbornness, like a demon. Xia Qifei's heart went cold, but his blood heated up. His eyes were about to burst, and he was filled with the desire to charge forward, stand in front of his brothers, and engage in a vigorous battle with this expert in the bamboo hat. Even if he died under the blade, so what? However, he could not move. Instead, he retreated. Sorrowfully but determinedly, he fled toward Jiangnan Restaurant. He knew that the other party's goal was to kill him. His name, this person, was very useful. If he wanted revenge, if he wanted to make the enemy unable to eat or sleep in peace, he had to live. Even if he had to live in such humiliation. The man in the bamboo hat was only 5 steps away from Xia Qifei. The 3 injured swordsmen of the 6th Bureau finally returned to their positions, but their injured bodies could not stand against the ace in the bamboo hat's shocking knife power. The metal rod broke into several pieces, and the 3 of them were sent flying. Jiangnan Restaurant was right in front of him. Xia Qifei fled up the steps. The waiters and customers at the door screamed in panic, but it was as if they were possessed. They were shocked by this bloody and terrifying scene. Their legs weakened, and it seemed they could not move. The ace in the bamboo hat was still 5 steps away from the stone steps when his knife chopped down. The direction of the knife was aimed at the wretched-looking Xia Qifei's back. A customer who seemed to have been scared out of his wits was currently trembling against the beautiful pillars of Jiangnan Restaurant. Then, for some reason, he shook out a metal drill and viciously stabbed it at the thigh of the expert wearing the bamboo hat. The ace with the bamboo hat was tall and powerful. This hidden assassin of the 6th Bureau did not have the confidence to attack the enemy's vital point before he could cut through Xia Qifei's body. Thus, he chose to stab the base of his thigh. No one expected that the ace in the bamboo hat would act as if he did not see the stab. The knife continued to chop down. With a clang, the metal rod struck the base of the man's thigh, but it was like stabbing a metal plate. The 6th Bureau assassin's heart chilled. He knew that this was the stupid martial art that no one on the Jianghu practiced anymore, iron shirt. Since the other party had practiced it and did not avoid it, it meant that he had stupidly spent decades practicing it, abandoned all the pleasures of a man and a woman, and practiced this martial art to the extreme. This 6th Bureau assassin knew he could not block this knife, but the commissioner had given a strict order to protect Xia Qifei's life. Thus, he flew sideways and fearlessly jumped toward the ace in the bamboo hat. In midair, he had already pulled out a small dagger from his boot and viciously stabbed it toward the eyes that were covered by the bamboo hat. At this moment, the ace's knife was less than a foot from Xia Qifei's back. The two metal rods once again appeared, tirelessly. There were a total of 7 6th Bureau swordsmen that Fan Xian had sent to protect Xia Qifei. Earlier, 5 had already appeared. The last 2 had originally been prepared to be like the leader earlier and attack the enemy's vital point to save Xia Qifei's life. However, after discovering the other party's abnormal martial arts, they knew that method would not work. Furthermore, the knife had already arrived, so they could only helplessly meet the other party's blow head-on. 2 very unpleasant snaps rang out. The 2 metal rods did not break, but they were shaken out of their hands. Xia Qifei took advantage of this block and threw himself forward like a pitiful puppy, narrowly dodging the knife. The knife light landed and cut a large hole in the stone steps of Jiangnan restaurant. Xia Qifei gave a cry and spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. He had been locked onto by this ace's aura the entire time. The knife attacked his body, so he was the one with the heaviest internal injuries. He spat out a mouthful of fresh blood, but his expression remained dark and ruthless as he lay on the ground. His right hand shot out from under his left armpit with incredible speed and pulled out the crossbow arrow hidden in his sleeve. This was something the Imperial envoy had given him for self-defense. When the crossbow arrow flew, the 6th Bureau swordsman had already leaped in front of the ace's body. The ace didn't have time to pull back his long knife. His left hand formed a fist and struck out horizontally. With a boom, the swordsman was sent flying. In this way, there was an opening in front of his face. The thin crossbow arrow shot in front of the bamboo hat. The man finally had a trace of a normal reaction. He tilted his head back slightly. It looked like the face was still a weak spot despite his tyrannical martial arts. The arrow flew through the air and, with a whoosh, pierced deeply into the top of the bamboo hat. There was a belt tied under the bamboo hat, so it was not taken away by the crossbow arrow. Thus, the true appearance of this mysterious 9th-level ace was still not revealed to the crowd. A light sound rang out, but it was not crisp. It was like the sound of children playing with firecrackers or the crackling sound of wet firewood burning. The crossbow arrow embedded in the top of the bamboo had exploded. A streak of fire flashed by. Immediately, a cloud of smoke rose from the ace's head. It looked incomparably strange. Although the modifications of the 3rd Bureau were still unable to bring out the true power of the gunpowder, and the power of the burning was not strong enough, it still burned the bamboo hat clean in an instant. The ace in the bamboo had held a long knife in his hand. His feet were unevenly spaced as he stood silently in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. His face was pitch black with terrifying blisters in the middle. His eyes were tightly closed. It was unclear whether he was alive or dead. Suddenly, he opened his eyes, and a glimmer of anger flashed through them. This mysterious ace was still not dead. However, what caused everyone to be indescribably shocked was not the fact that this person had managed to preserve his life under such a heavy blow, because with his strength, it was not so easy to kill him. What shocked Xia Qifei and the Overwatch Council the most was that this ace, who always wore the bamboo hat, was bald. Nowadays, the world was particular about filial piety. It was said that the body, hair, and skin were given to one's parents. No one would randomly cut their hair, much less be bald. The only people in this world who were allowed to walk around with a bald appearance were the ascetic monks. The ascetic monks who believed in the temple. Everyone knew that the ascetic monks loved the people and cherished their bodies. They never had anything to do with the battles of the secular world. Why had this extremely powerful ascetic monk come to kill Xia Qifei today? There was no time to think about this shocking question because the ascetic monk once again raised that terrifying long knife. With a muffled grunt, he held the knife with both hands and chopped towards Xia Qifei on the steps. His power was like a mad tiger that could not be stopped by 1,000 soldiers. 1,000 soldiers could not be stopped by a single flower. The despairing people on the stone steps only felt a cool breeze sweep past in front of them. A flower like ocean bloomed in front of their eyes. In a moment, it drove away the smell of blood on the long street in front of the restaurant. Fragrant flowers filled the air and refreshed the mind. A pair of steady and gentle hands, carrying a basket of cheap silk flowers bought from Wuzhou, welcomed the sharp edge of the long knife that pressed forward with indomitable will. The knife came very quickly, but the hands were even faster. For some reason, in the next moment, the flower basket was already hanging from the long knife. The knife force was very fierce. The flower basket was very light. When the flower basket gently hung from the tip of the knife, the long knife, which had been steady and terrifying, involuntarily trembled and drooped down. It was as if the flower basket was incomparably heavy. The knife force paused. The ascetic monk holding the knife gave an explosive cry. Jinshi surged out of his arms and valiantly lifted it up like he was lifting up Dong Mountain. With a crashing sound, the flower basket finally could not withstand the resistance of the astonishing true energy from both sides. It was pierced by the tip of the saber and fell apart. The flower basket that was woven from the vines was pulled out bit by bit in that moment that seemed to have come to a standstill. The vines shattered and turned into countless fragments that shot out and hit the ground with a paw-paw sound. The silk flowers in the basket were stirred up by the wind and fluttered into the air, decorating the long street like an azure battlefield. Amidst the rain of flower petals, the girl wearing a flowery cotton jacket was like a gust of wind. Following the trembling long knife, she gently attacked the ascetic monk. The ascetic monk struck out with his palm. The wind from his palm was like a knife, but it could not stop the other party's swaying figure. A moment later, the pair of gentle hands gently patted the hilt of the knife. Then, with a flick of her fingers, it pierced straight toward the edge of the ascetic monk's huge palm. The ascetic monk gave a strange cry. A strange red color formed from the jinshi surging appeared on his burned face. His entire body retreated like a large bird. In one exchange, this killing godlike ascetic monk had been forced back. The rain of flower petals was still falling. Contrasted with the blue night and bright moon above Suzhou, it appeared particularly beautiful. Flower petals fell one after another. Haidang stood calmly in the rain of flower petals. She did not pursue. She only looked at the ascetic monk with a trace of worry. Village girls occasionally had their most beautiful moments. Second priest of the Qing temple, why are you here? Haidang asked with a face full of worry. The ascetic monk looked at her and recognized her identity. In a stern voice, he cried out, Haidang Duo, why are you here? Haidang lowered her head slightly and quietly said, I'm with Fan Xian. The ascetic monk was startled. It was as if he had not thought that Haidang, the successor of Tianyi Dao and Northern Qi's Saint Girl, would give such a reason so easily. Today, I want to kill. Don't stop me. The ascetic monk looked at her and said coldly. Haidang furrowed her brows slightly. She looked at the stone steps of Jiangnan restaurant, the dead people in the middle of the long street, the broken limbs, and the pungent blood. In a quiet voice, she said, You've already killed enough people tonight. Don't kill anymore. It was not a request or persuasion. Since Fan Xian was worried about Xia Qifei's side and had come up with the idea to have Haidang come take a look, it represented his absolute trust in Haidang. With Haidang here, other than the legendary four old immortals, as long as she said not to kill, no one else could kill. Although the ascetic monk had been badly burned, it was still possible to see a glimmer of determination on his face. He glanced at Haidang with a strange gaze and then turned to leave. He didn't need a path to leave. The ascetic monk directly smashed through a courtyard wall on the side of the street. With a rumble, a large hole appeared in the wall. His figure disappeared into this hole. The sky full of flower petals fell. Haidang was silent. Then, her body floated lightly, and she arrived behind the courtyard wall. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 369. I started running a fever yesterday, and my mind is a bit muddled. I will continue to lie down in a bit. If my body improves slowly, perhaps I will write less tomorrow. Haidang swept into the courtyard beside the street and gently stroked the strands of hair at her temples. She looked at the ascetic monk who had indeed not left. Those who could live on the two sides of the street were naturally wealthy and respectable. After the intrusion, the owner of the house had long woken up and hid far away, not daring to light a lamp. At this moment, the light from the restaurant across the street shone through the large hole in the wall and into the courtyard. It also shone on this person's face, which appeared particularly terrifying after his injury. Haiding looked at him and asked with slight worry, "Why is it like this?" The ascetic monk only looked at her calmly and did not reply. Haiding was not in a hurry, although the faint sound of the Suzhou government officials moving their chains could already be heard in the distance. There were not many ascetic monks in this world. The ascetic monks, led by the great priest of the Qing temple, always preached in various places. These ascetic monks silently recited the wondrous meaning of scriptures and did good deeds. They had never been a power known for their martial strength. However, during these decades, the Qing temple had produced an anomaly, Great Master Sanshi. He was born with divine strength and had cultivated his internal and external martial arts to the peak. Additionally, his personality was ruthless and he hated evil like an enemy. However, because of his identity as a priest, very few people had seen him fight. Few people knew his true face and power. Of course, this was also because the previous great priest of the Qing temple had always used scriptures to advise him and watched him closely. Otherwise, this great master Sanshi would have long become the most famous figure in the world. After all, the Qing temple and northern Qi's Tianidao were both places where the temple was worshipped and could be considered to be of the same lineage. Thus, Haiding had seen him once in the past. She knew that the ascetic monk in front of her, the second priest of the Qing temple, the legendary Great Master Sanshi, was a noble figure purely in terms of status. In terms of temperament and cultivation, he was not a bloodthirsty person. Thus, what she did not understand was why the priest, who had never involved himself in worldly affairs, would join the palace treasury or the struggle of the court. Juanshang Conference, just what kind of organization is it? Haiding said with a slight frown, as if she was talking to herself. The second priest looked coldly at her and said, "Don't waste your time thinking about these problems." "Yes, I am a member of the Juanshang Conference." The Juanshang Conference has always been a loose association. Perhaps this organization never had a specific goal. Once everyone found a certain goal, they would advance together towards that goal. Haiding asked softly, "Then, what is your goal?" "Kill Xia Qifei," the second priest said coldly. Haiding smiled and said, "It's just a dispute between merchants. How could it attract your attention?" She calmly asked, "Xia Qifei has already won a bid in the palace treasury. You chose to kill him in the middle of the street. Are you not afraid of the anger of the Qing court?" The second priest said expressionlessly, "Killing Xia Qifei is only to return the palace treasury matter to the path we want." Haiding was slightly taken aback and said in great confusion, "These words are not enough to convince me. I understand you and the high priest. You are not a person who covets fame and wealth." The second priest fell silent. Haiding then said in a quiet voice, "The Ming family also does not have the right to invite you." The second priest slowly raised his head. "As I said earlier, this is a loose collaboration. However, my goal and the Ming family's goal just happen to be the same. You want to deal with Fan Xian?" Haitong's brows furrowed. The second priest shook his head coldly. Haitong sighed in her heart. She guessed the truth of the matter. The other person's identity was special. Since he could not be ordered by anyone, yet he wanted to interfere in the palace treasury bidding matter, it must be because of the problems in Jingdo. Since the second priest's goal was not Fan Xian, then the source of the matter was about to be revealed. Haiding shook her head and said, "It is truly hard to believe that a priest of the Qing temple would secretly oppose the Qing emperor." Countless blisters had appeared on the second priest's face. There were threads of blood in the black ash. It looked terrifying. The pupils of his eyes turned white. Faintly, he said, "The saint girl is clever. The imperial envoy has come under the emperor's order to rectify the palace treasury. What I am thinking is to make this so-called emperor's order forever unable to be carried out." Haitong was silent. It looked like an undercurrent had already begun to appear within the Qing court. The direction of the undercurrent was directed toward the man sitting on the dragon chair. As the man's most favored and trusted official, Fan Xian would stand at the forefront and face great danger if nothing unexpected happened. The reason the second priest was willing to reveal so many secrets in front of Haidang was because of Haitong's identity as a northern Qi person and the closeness between the Qing temple and Tianidao. The second priest knew that no matter how close Haidang was to Fan Xian, as a northern Qi person, knowing that someone within the Qing kingdom was preparing to harm the emperor, he would maintain a clever silence. Haidang was silent for a moment and then suddenly said, "Master, it is not wise to ask a tiger for its skin." The loose Juanshan conference had to walk closer together because of that terrifying reason. For such a major matter, there had to be someone taking the lead. Based on Haitong's analysis, the leader was perhaps the eldest princess who had never shown much power but had made Fan Xian carefully guard against. The second priest coldly said, "In the eyes of a flower, the worm is the tiger. In the eyes of a bamboo, the fire is the tiger. In the eyes of a river, the sun is the tiger. In my eyes, the emperor is the tiger." Haiding furrowed her brows and asked, "What exactly happened? What kind of matter would make the second priest of the Qing temple so resolutely throw himself into this messy world? What made the ascetic monk, who had always been merciful and pitiful to the people, become a demonic Asura who beheaded people?" A glimmer of sadness and reminiscence flashed through the second priest's terrifying eyes. A moment later, he gently said, "Senior disciple has passed away." Haidang was slightly startled. The news of the Qing temple's great priest's death had already spread throughout the world a few months ago. At the time, the Qing court had issued an edict saying that the great priest had been preaching in the south for many years and had entered a foul miasma for a long time. He had become ill from overwork, so not long after returning to the capital, he had died in bed. Hearing the second priest say this, Haidang understood that the inside story was certainly not so simple. Perhaps the death of the great priest of the Qing temple had much to do with the Qing emperor. She put her hands together and bowed. She knew she couldn't continue asking this question. He had already given her enough hints and wouldn't say anything more. "Earlier, why didn't you stop me from revealing your identity?" Haitang asked silently. "Killing people on the street today, were you not worried that you would inadvertently alert the enemy and that the Qing emperor would notice some clues?" The second priest of the Qing temple expressionlessly raised 3 fingers. "There are 3 stones in the mountain. One is bright, one is upright, and one is abandoned." From a young age, Sancher was different from normal people. He was chased into the wilderness by the villagers. If not for my senior disciple, he would have long been buried in the bellies of wild dogs. The second priest of the Qing temple's voice was like a large bell. His beard and hair floated in the wind. He was powerful without being angry. "The people of the world have taken my senior disciple's life. I will disturb the hearts of the world. I will use bright skills to kill people, use a righteous voice to deceive people, and use my body as an abandoned pawn to kill a chaotic ruler and bring peace to the people." Haidang understood the first 2 meanings of these words, but she didn't understand the last one. However, countless complicated emotions still surged in her heart. Although there were already signs of division within the Qing court, looking at the Qing emperor's powerful control over the governors of the 7 roads and the military, she knew that there were no fundamental problems with the Qing kingdom's rule. Sancher killing people on the street tonight was nothing more than using bright skills and righteous voice to announce to the world that the priests of the Qing temple and the court were no longer companions on the same path. Although the second priest was not enough to represent the entire Qing temple and all the believers and ascetic monks under heaven, this kind of declaration still had a powerful symbolic meaning. As for the last word, abandon, Haiding finally understood. Great Master Sancher also knew that the instigator behind the scenes of the Juanshan conference was not much better than the Qing emperor. His actions today were, for one, to kill Xia Qifei and destroy the Qing emperor's grand policy. For another, it was resolutely abandoning her. Perhaps this second priest didn't even know what he should be doing. After losing the great priest's teachings and restrictions, Sanshur had no way of killing the emperor. Furthermore, the priests of the Qing temple did not want the people of the world to suffer for the sake of revenge. For Sanshur, the people of the Jiangnan water bandits were bloodstained bandits. If they were killed, then they were killed. There was not a trace of pity in his heart. However, the powerful desire for revenge in his heart, his judgment of the situation, and his worry for the people of the world made this Sanshur sink into a mental conflict. Thus, he told Haiding these things. At the same time, he told her that he was willing to be a sacrificial pawn. I will return to Jingdo to kill people and tell Imperial Advisor Ku he what I said today. Sanshur was silent and melancholy at odds with his magnificent figure. He turned and left the courtyard, which already had a large hole in it. Haiding stood quietly, without any movement. She thought to herself that the second priest of the Qing temple had so easily abandoned her, but the Juanshang conference would certainly have follow-up actions. She didn't know if they would target Fan Xian far away in Jiangnan or the Qing emperor sitting peacefully in Jingdo. It looked like there were many people in this world who didn't want the Qing emperor to live comfortably. How should the Qi kingdom respond? Sanshur? A sacrificial pawn? Fan Xian looked at Haiding with a not-quite-there smile, but a dark fire danced in his eyes. I don't understand the enigmatic conversation between you people. I only know that if he truly wanted to abandon himself, he should have charged directly into the front gates of the royal palace and fought a great battle with the great prince's imperial soldiers and Unikong in the palace instead of running into Suzhou and ruining my plans. To kill my people. The last two sentences were spoken in a higher voice. His tone was very severe. As for the word, abandon, Haiding gazed at him calmly and said, the Juanshang conference certainly doesn't want the second priest to reveal his identity so early. If I hadn't been there today, probably no one would have had the opportunity to reveal this secret. The meaning behind these words was clear. The enemy's calculations had gone wrong. The second priest had failed to kill, so he might as well give up. He laid out all the problems in front of Haiding and used himself to attract the Qing emperor's attention while hiding the other existences of the Juanshang conference. Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, this second priest thinks too highly of himself. Perhaps the emperor has nothing, but his confidence, which I don't know where it comes from, is stronger than everyone else's. If I were you, how could I bear to let that baldy leave so peacefully? He only said a few simple words and convinced you to ignore it. It looks like this second priest truly has the ability to be a lobbyist. These words appeared normal, but they actually contained a criticism. In his anger, Fan Xian straightforwardly expressed that there was a portion of the conversation between the second priest and Haiding that Haiding had not directly said. After all, this was internal Qing politics. As a northern Qi person, no one could say for sure what Haiding would do for the benefit of her own country. Haiding was not angry. She explained in a quiet voice, the Juanshang conference will certainly protect the Ming family, and the old matriarch also fell for your provocation. She invited someone to kill Xia Qifei. Isn't this all within your expectations? Why are you still so angry? Fan Xian paused. He had not expected that Haiding would so mercilessly reveal all of her sinister thoughts. He furrowed his brows and said, correct, I wanted to force the Ming family to act. However, I had not thought that the Ming family would be able to invite such an ace. It looks like I still underestimated the so-called Juanshang conference. Tonight, there were heavy casualties in front of Jiangnan restaurant. About 80 to 90% of the Jiangnan water bandits that Xia Qifei had brought into Suzhou had been killed by that sharp knife. In order to protect Xia Qifei's life, the Overwatch Council had paid a heavy price. One of the 7 assassins of the 6th Bureau had died. At this moment, there were still 4 people unconscious. No one knew if they would survive. Ever since Fan Xian had taken over the Overwatch Council, this was the Overwatch Council's biggest loss. He couldn't help but blame himself and be angry. Everything had clearly been within his calculations. Unfortunately, because he had underestimated the other party's strength, it had led to this situation. What made Fan Xian most angry was in the plan. Once the Ming family was forced to act, he could use the opportunity to attack. However, all of this had been destroyed by Haitong's cry on Chong Street. The second priest? At most, the second priest of the Qing Temple would have dealings with the royal family. If Fan Xian wanted to use this matter to investigate the Ming family, it was impossible. Even if he used the Overwatch Council's most sinister and dirty methods to frame them, it would be impossible to convince the court and the officials in Jingdou. No one believed that a wealthy Jiangnan Ming family could order the second priest of the Qing Temple to act as an assassin. This reality made Fan Xian feel an absurd sense of defeat. In the past, when he faced enemies, even if it was not the other party who did it, he could still frame them and make them admit it. Now, it was clearly the other party who did it. If he openly investigated it, no one would believe him. He shook his head helplessly and waved his hand. Duo, go to sleep first. I was in a bad mood earlier, so my words were a bit harsh. Don't take it to heart. Haitong glanced at him with some surprise and furrowed her brows. Tonight, Fan Xian took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the burning feeling in his heart. A warm smile rose again to his face. In a quiet voice, he said, "It's very late. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it tomorrow." For tonight, Fan Xian had prepared for a long time. To suddenly give up at this moment, no one knew what he was thinking. Haitong left the study somewhat sullenly. Fan Xian sat quietly in front of the desk and thought for a bit. He then began to raise his brush and write on a piece of paper. He had to report what happened tonight to the emperor in Jingdou. In reality, he did not think that the appearance of the second priest was anything remarkable. As an official, even if he also harbored evil intentions, he had to display an attitude of concern and fear at the appropriate time. After finishing the secret letter, he couldn't resist picking up the letter beside it. The handwriting on the letter was dry and ugly. It was the handwriting of that old man called Chen Pingping. In the letter, Chen Pingping did not say anything about the court or officialdom. He only told a short story, a story about crows drinking water. He warned Fan Xian, who was not by his side, that no matter what it was, he could not be rushed. The more rushed he was, the less water he would have to drink. Throwing a stone into a bottle? This was a game where if you wanted to take, you had to first give. Fan Xian looked at this letter and furrowed his brows. Today, in the palace treasury courtyard, Ming Qingda had left a deep impression on him. The old Ming master's ability to remain calm in the face of chaos was truly worth learning from. In comparison, the old Ming matriarch, who had been successfully stirred up by him and had secretly notified the Juanshang conference to kill people on the street, did not seem to be much of a problem. However, the old matriarch was still in power in the Ming family. This reality made Fan Xian's heart relax a little. The person who had acted was the second priest. This matter had many implications, so it was not suitable to act immediately. Fan Xian thought for a bit and decided to push the date back a few days. Xia Qifei was lucky and did not die. Tomorrow, the palace treasury bidding still had to continue. Life also had to go on and the days also had to go on. After everything had calmed down, when the stone had reached the bottleneck, he would begin to drink water. "Going out," he said as he accepted a large cloak from Cece's hands. Cece looked at him in astonishment, thinking that it was almost midnight. Where were they going to go? However, she knew that the young master was in a hurry to go out at this time. Something big must have happened, so she didn't ask further. Fan Xian put on the crane cloak and hurried toward the front door of Ming Garden. As he walked, he said to the subordinate beside him, "This matter has gotten out of hand. Immediately send out a first-level council order. Increase the search for the second priest's whereabouts in the southeast." The subordinate furrowed his brows and replied, "Sir, the Qing temple has always been managed by the palace. Let's also interfere." Fan Xian was slightly angry and scolded. "He's already come to kill us. Why can't I kill him?" The subordinate quickly shut his mouth and gave the order. In reality, Fan Xian's words also had other intentions. Haitong had said earlier that the second priest looked like he was preparing to go to Jingdou and assassinate Jing Ke. Yet Fan Xian had the Overwatch Council search the southeast. The shadow was not in Suzhou, and the Overwatch Council's current manpower could not keep Great Master Sanshi. Fan Xian's actions were nothing more than a gesture. First, it prevented his subordinates from meeting this ace again and suffering heavy losses. Second, it allowed the second priest to enter the capital. Clearly, the second priest had entered the capital to play dragon slaying, yet Fan Xian had made such arrangements. No one knew what he was thinking. Walking to the front door, Tiger Guard Gao helped him lift the curtain. Fan Xian had one foot on the carriage and stopped.
He seemed to be thinking about something.
A moment later, he turned around and said, "Call back all of the people standing outside tonight." The Overwatch Council official was slightly startled. He wondered if tonight's plan had been cancelled. Given his understanding of the commissioner, if his subordinates suffered a loss, he would immediately retaliate. Had the commissioner suddenly changed his personality? Ignoring his subordinate shock, Fan Xian crawled into the carriage. The wheels of the carriage rolled across the stone path of Suzhou and made a clattering sound. At this time, it was already late into the night. There were no pedestrians on the streets. There were only the Suzhou government bailiffs who had learned of what had happened. They glanced around with sleepy eyes. However, they were fine. At least, they were more relaxed than the brothers in front of Jiangnan restaurant. It was said that the brothers there were carrying corpses and picking up severed limbs. A few of them had already vomited in disgust. Fan Xian half leaned against the back of the chair and gently pinched between his brows with both hands. He forcefully pushed away the tiredness in his mind and the powerful urge to jump out and kill at any moment. He allowed the carriage to take him along the quiet Suzhou night streets. Beside the carriage were a few tiger guards. Xia Qifei had been attacked, so Fan Xian's security had been increased. Before long, the carriage came to the side door of the Jiangnan governor's manor. There was no time to hand over any name cards. Fan Xian straightforwardly used his face as a pass and burrowed all the way into the manor. Under the confused escort of the manor's housekeeper and servants, he came directly to the flower hall in the back garden that the manor used for receiving secret guests. He hadn't even taken 2 sips of tea when the Jiangnan governor Xueqing, who the housekeeper said had long fallen asleep, rushed over. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at Xueqing's attire. After a moment of surprise, he smiled. The governor's clothes were neat and tidy. It didn't look like he had just been woken up by him. It looked like the officials in Suzhou would not be able to sleep well tonight. Xueqing saw him smile and couldn't resist smiling as well. He waved his hand to have everyone leave. He took a sip of tea and moistened his throat. Straightforwardly, he asked, "Imperial envoy, what business do you have to come in the middle of the night?" Fan Xian's answer was even more direct. He raised a finger and said, "Tonight, someone wants to kill my people, so I am preparing to kill." The Jiangnan governor was slightly startled and sank into silence. Of course, he knew what had happened in Suzhou tonight. He had also expected that Fan Xian, who had always been sinister and protective, would certainly act against the Ming family. However, he had not thought that the other party would come to inform him beforehand. This kind of attitude made Xueqing feel a glimmer of comfort. Xueqing thought for a moment and then said evenly, "I can understand the imperial envoy's current feelings." These words were as good as not saying anything. Understanding did not mean support. Fan Xian also understood this point. After all, the Ming family was a prominent family in Jiangnan. There were tens of thousands of children in the family. Their support in court was even more so. The Ming family's hands and feet had long been deeply embedded into the lives of the Jiangnan people. If Fan Xian wanted to use the martial power of the Overwatch Council to carry out simple and crude oppression of the Ming family, it would certainly cause countless reprisals. The situation in Jiangnan might become turbulent because of this. Jiangnan could not fall into chaos. Once it did, as the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing would be the first to bear the brunt. He would not be able to explain himself to the court and the emperor. Thus, in front of Fan Xian, he could only say he understood and not say anything else. For Fan Xian, the Black Knights were still in Zhongbei. Unless it was the last step, he would not risk the emperor's suspicions and the officials' uproar to move troops into Suzhou. Thus, at this moment, the power he could use was actually not much. To deal with a character like the Ming family, he needed the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing's help, or at least his tacit approval. This was why he had rushed through the night to the governor's manor. Knowing what Xueqing was worried about, Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "Governor, don't worry. Although I am somewhat bold and unrestrained, when I do things, I will follow the rules." Xueqing's heart was slightly at ease. He was not a person on the eldest princess's side, so he was willing to stay out of the battle between the Overwatch Council and the prince. Tonight, the Ming family had sent someone to assassinate the bidding merchant in front of the Jiangnan restaurant. Although everyone knew that the merchant was actually a water bandit, this reality still made this border official feel angry. To be a merchant, one had to have their duties and boundaries. Tonight, the Ming family had crossed the line. Furthermore, the Jiangnan restaurant where the assassination took place was the governor's property. Before the palace treasury's 16 bids have all been decided, I will not act. Fan Xian gazed into Xueqing's eyes and said evenly, "After the day after tomorrow, I will have the Ming family pay the price for this matter. Just let them learn a lesson." Xueqing sighed like an ascetic monk who bemoaned the state of the universe and pitied the fate of mankind. Fan Xian smiled slightly. He knew that this governor still did not want the matter to become too big. Furthermore, he did not have the extravagant hope that he would be able to knock away a large family that had lasted for hundreds of years within a few days. He said, "Don't worry, I know what I'm doing." Evidence, the most important thing is evidence. Xueqing looked at the young imperial envoy in front of him and couldn't resist opening his mouth to remind him. This matter was not a simple battle between officials and merchants. It was a battle between the powers of the court. If they could not obtain evidence and wanted to cut the Ming family's flesh and blood, it would be very easy for some people in Jingdo to grab hold of Fan Xian's weakness. In life, there is never a lack of evidence, Fan Xian said calmly. It is just a lack of eyes to discover evidence. The Overwatch Council's eyes are very bright. These two most powerful officials in Jiangnan talked in secret for a long time. When the two of them could not hide their weariness, only then did Fan Xian take his leave. The situation in Jiangnan was becoming more and more murky. It was like the darkness before dawn. At a glance, one could only see the bottom of the pitch-black abyss. Fan Xian leaned against the back of the carriage seat and fell into a deep sleep. He was completely unaware that the sky outside the carriage was gradually brightening. There were no bells or drums in the morning in Suzhou, but the dawn of spring had already arrived. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 370. The second priest cannot have his hair and beard float. This is my mistake. These days, I have indeed been a bit muddle-headed. Please forgive me. P.S. I still need a monthly ticket. Please don't find it annoying. Although many people did not sleep well that night, many people were busy and some people did not sleep at all. Furthermore, such a big thing had happened in Suzhou. However, the second day of the palace treasury's New Year bidding still arrived as scheduled. This was the rule. This was the usual rule of the court. Thus, even though eunuch Huang and Guozheng used Suzhou's tight security and Xia Qifei's assassination attempt as an excuse to ask the transport company to push back the bidding by a few days, Fan Xian still resolutely and valiantly demanded that the bidding begin on time and not be delayed for even a moment. The Ming family had already fought for one night's time. If they were given more time to react, who knew what else would happen? Fan Xian rubbed the sore spot between his brows and forcefully hid the tiredness on his face. He watched the merchants file in. He found that although the expressions of these Jiangnan merchants remained calm, there was still a strange emotion hidden in their eyes. It looked like the matter of Xia Qifei's assassination attempt last night had also brought them great trouble. Fan Xian was temporarily unable to determine whether this change was good or bad for his plan. The Ming father and son were the second to last group of people to enter the palace treasury courtyard. Behind them were the long attendants of the clan and the accounts master. With warm expressions, they bowed in all directions. The officials and merchants only gave a perfunctory greeting before moving their gazes away. No one dared to appear too close to the Ming family in front of Fan Xian. When the Ming father and son bowed in front of the main hall, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng greeted them warmly. It was clear they were expressing their support for each other. Fan Xian watched with cold eyes and nodded with a smile. He then waved his hand for them to sit. Ming Qingda's gaze was very strange. He appeared very calm. It looked like, for some reason, he was not afraid of Fan Xian's revenge for the assassination attempt on Xia Qifei last night. Before the main door closed, the Jiangnan water bandits also arrived. Behind Xia Qifei, other than the few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue that Fan Xian had sent, there were only 3 personal guards left. His other brothers had already died on the long street last night. Today, Xia Qifei's face was deathly pale. It seemed that there was no way for him to recover from his serious injuries. However, today's matter was of great importance, so he forced himself to come. Compared to the bandages on his body, the white bandage on his forehead was particularly dazzling and bright. The subordinates behind him also wore white bandages on their foreheads. In this spring, they exuded an icy chill. It was the first time in decades that a mourner had entered the door of the palace treasury. Everyone in the house had their eyes on the bandits from room B4, who were wearing mourning clothes and had a murderous aura around them. The merchants led by the Xiong family of Lingnan and the Sun family of Chuanzhou walked out of their rooms and greeted Xia Qifei, comforting him softly. Supported by his subordinates, Xia Qifei slowly walked to the front of the main hall. He didn't even glance at the father and son of the Ming family in the first room. In a quiet voice, he said, "I still came." Eunuch Hong and Guozheng had a strange expression on their faces. The corner of Fan Xian's eye twitched and immediately returned to normal. Calmly, he spread out his right hand and said steadily and firmly, "As long as you come, there will be a place for you here." Everyone understood the meaning of Fan Xian's words. Eunuch Huang and Guozheng could not use these words to criticize Fan Xian. The Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, had said he was sick and did not come. Presently, in the large house, Fan Xian's position was the highest. It was clear that Xueqing was letting Fan Xian do as he wished. However, the Ming family's backers would not watch as the entire situation was in Fan Xian's control. Eunuch Huang paused for a moment and then said, "Sir Xia, I heard that the Jianghu fighting broke out again last night in Suzhou. Many of your subordinates have died, however, entering the courtyard in mourning is not proper. After all, Xia Qifei's birth was not honorable. That was why the old matriarch of the Ming family dared to invite the aces of the Juanshan conference to carry out the assassination. After all, if they could kill Xia Qifei, it would solve many problems. Furthermore, they could push the blame onto the Jianghu fighting." Eunuch Huang's words right now were nothing more than an attempt to make this point a reality. Fan Xian felt it was beneath him to bicker with him about these nominal things. However, after hearing Eunuch Huang say entering the courtyard in mourning was not proper, his anger gradually rose. Narrowing his eyes, he said in a quiet voice, "Eunuch Huang, don't make me angry." Although these words were spoken lightly, the voice seemed to have scraped out from a crack in an iceberg and scuttled out from the abyss in the ground. It was so cold and sinister that it made those who heard it tremble in fear. "Don't make me angry." These words burrowed into Eunuch Huang's ears and made the old eunuch involuntarily shiver. He quickly closed his mouth. If he didn't want to be angry with this damned sissy youth, then let him go. In any case, the Ming family had already prepared all night. In a moment, as long as he watched, there wouldn't be any problems. If he let Fan Xian use this opportunity to fly into a rage, who could stop him? It would not be good to ruin everything. To the side, Guozheng, who was about to open his mouth, also felt a chill in his heart. He quickly swallowed back the words he was about to say. Last night, they had all thought that Fan Xian would act rashly in his anger. Thus, They had both written memorials and made preparations to grab hold of Fan Xian's weakness. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian had maintained his calm the entire time. It made him and Eunuch Huang very disappointed. They also knew that the evil fire in Fan Xian's heart had been suppressed for a long time. They didn't know when it would explode. Thinking of the ministers and officials who had fallen under Fan Xian's hands, Guozheng also retreated. The eldest princess wanted to protect the Ming family's share, not their face. Another explosion rang out. Outside the courtyard of the palace treasury manor, paper flew chaotically, and smoke gradually filled the air. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at this somewhat familiar scene. For some reason, he thought of last year, the day he left Shangjing in northern Qi and the moment he heard the news of Zhuang Mohan's death. On that day, the firecrackers outside Shangjing's gates to send him off seemed to also be sending off Master Zhuang. Were the firecrackers today to send off the people who died last night? Xia Qifei brought his subordinates and walked silently back to room before. He took off the white ribbon on his head and carefully laid it out on the table in a perfectly straight line. His brothers behind him also followed his eldest brother and took off the white ribbons and laid them out straight. One by one, they were strong and powerful. Fan Xian's brows furrowed imperceptibly. No one knew what he was thinking about. The palace treasury official responsible for announcing once again stood on the stone steps. The palace treasury's second day of bidding officially began. Yesterday, there had been a total of 5 lots. The palace treasury had a total of 16 lots. Other than the last 2 that were tied to 8 lots, there were still 3 lots left to be announced at the very beginning. The Ming family still followed the agreement between the Jiangnan merchants and did not call out a price. On the contrary, it was Xia Qifei who did not seem to be disturbed by the events of last night. Very calmly, he began to bid and took one of the lots. The other 2 were taken by the Ling Nanxiong family and the Hangzhou Qin family. This was probably something that had been discussed at the Jiangnan restaurant last night. The lot that Xia Qifei had taken was still the north route. After Fan Xian received the bid from the flower hall and confirmed that Xia Qifei had taken this lot, he couldn't help but nod his head quietly. Xia Qifei did not let his emotions affect his decisions. This was something he admired. The bidding for these 3 lots proceeded in an ordinary and uneventful manner. The prices were basically the same as in previous years. There was nothing surprising about them. However, none of the merchants and officials present had much of a reaction. Everyone knew that the highlight of the day was at the back. It was in the last 8 lots that the Ming family was determined to win. Goods from the Southeast Road and the Sea Road. For lots in total. The bidding begins. The highest bidder wins. The Palace Treasury Transport Company official stood on the stone steps and called out expressionlessly. He didn't know how many years he had been calling out these words. Every year, after these words were called out, only the Ming family would bid. No one would compete with the Ming family. Thus, when he called it out, he felt it was dull and uninteresting. But this year was different. As the call fell, the first to push open the door and hand out the leather envelope was room before. Countless voices of discussion rang out in the courtyard. Xia Qifei, the 7th young master rumored to have been abandoned by the Ming family, had finally begun to act against the Ming family. In room A1, Ming Qingda's expression did not change. It was as if he had long expected this situation. In the past few years, because of his family's strength and the eldest princess watching from the back, none of the Jiangnan merchants dared to bid against him. Thus, the Ming family in the last 8 lots was the same as the Cui family in the first 6. They were all playing a one-man show. After playing this kind of show for a long time, one would eventually grow tired of it. Now, someone had finally come to compete with the Ming family. While Ming Qingda felt a slight sense of fear, he also felt a glimmer of excitement. He smiled slightly at his son beside him and said, 20% more. Hold him down. Ming Lanshi paled in shock. Father meant to say that the first round of bidding would be 20% more than last year's fixed price. If, in a moment, Xia Qifei truly had enough silver in the second round and continued to follow, how could his side hold out? Ming Qingda picked up the teacup beside him and took a sip. Slowly, he said, The extra 20% is not for Xia Qifei, but for someone else. Ming Lanshe was confused. He thought to himself, in the palace treasury courtyard, other than Xia Qifei, who had the support of the imperial envoy, who else dared to compete with his family for these 2 big lots? In the heart of this young master of the Ming family, he still firmly believed that Xia Qifei's confidence came from the silver Fan Xian had secretly moved from the Ministry of Revenue. The other people did not have this kind of power. Ming Qingda didn't say anything, but his heart was as clear as a mirror. Fan Xian had Xia Qifei sweep everywhere yesterday. This was to turn the other Jiangnan merchants into hungry wolves, and a hungry wolf dared to take a bite or 2 of anyone's meat. When the 2 leather envelopes were handed into the flower hall, all of the merchants and officials paying attention to this matter dropped their buttocks back to their seats and let out a breath of turbid air. They knew a good show had officially begun. However, it seemed that many people did not guess the direction of this show. The door to room B1 was also slowly pushed open. A leather envelope was handed into the hands of the official in front of the door. The Chuanzhou Sun family. The entire courtyard burst into an uproar. No one had thought that the Chuanzhou Sun family would come to snatch this hot cup of soup when 2 tigers were fighting. The Sun family. Ming Lanshe looked at his father in shock. Where did their family get so much silver? Ming Qingda's expression did not change. If the Sun family alone is not enough, can't a few families come together? Don't you think that Xiong Bailing, that old thing, has become much quieter today? And those families that have been watching us this whole time, if they don't have something to hide, why would they watch for so long? It's not like there are flowers growing on my face. In the main hall, the officials sitting in the 3 grand chairs all had their own thoughts. Fan Xian had long expected this development, so he was not very surprised. However, Yunikuang and Guozhang gritted their teeth. They thought to themselves that the Chuanzhou Sun family was too daring to come out and make trouble at a time like this. Under everyone's nervous gazes, the results of the first round of bidding came out. Fan Xian held the bidding list from the flower hall and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He thought to himself that it was not without reason that the Ming family had been in Jiangnan for so many years. In Fan Xian's plan, the last 4 lots would be when he and the Ming family would do their utmost to raise the price. Although the amount of silver moved over from northern Qi was large, it required too long of a route. In the end, there was still an upper limit. Furthermore, after Xia Qifei had won 5 lots in a row, he had also paid a large amount of money as a deposit. If he could carry out an unlimited fake bid, Xia Qifei could completely call out an empty bid and make the Ming family cough up blood. The problem was, Fan Xian still did not understand Ming Qingda. This nominal master of the Ming family did not seem to be as simple as in name. Fan Xian was unable to determine whether or not Ming Qingda would disregard the eldest princess' strict orders and cleverly cut off his hand if he truly carried out a fake bid. Given the amount of silver in Fan Xian's hands, if he used it to raise the price, he could only be confident that he could heavily injure the Ming family in the second 4-bound lots. If the Ming family really went all out in the 3rd round and let go of these 4-bound lots, if Xia Qifei raised the price too high, there could only be 2 possible outcomes. One was that he would not be able to take out 40% of the deposit, and the other was that after successfully winning the first 4-bound lots, he would have no more strength left and watch as the Ming family effortlessly won the next 4-bound lots. The second outcome was not what Fan Xian wanted. He had no way of controlling the shipping routes to Dongyi, so the 4-bound lots that the Ming family could not do without were of little value to him. He did not want Xia Qifei to actually win this lot, but if he watched as the Ming family so easily won the next 4-bound lots, Fan Xian would not be able to swallow it. As for the first possibility, if the price really exploded, under the watchful eyes of Yunikuang and Guozheng, under the watchful eyes of so many people, the matter of the palace treasury would truly be for naught, and Xia Qifei would most likely not have a path of survival. In summary, in Fan Xian's earlier plan, the first 4 consecutive bids were to have the Chuanzhou Sun family come out and fire. Xia Qifei's bid was only a feint. He did not plan on risking his life. Looking at the list of bids handed over by the flower hall, Fan Xian knew that the old master of the Ming family had long guessed his plans, so the first round of bids had reached such a terrifying number. The Sun family dared to make a move today because of the message he had sent through Shi Chanli last night. Faced with the Ming family's mountain-like attack, and then thinking of the Ming family brazenly sending people to assassinate Xia Qifei last night, the flames of civil and military fighting each other, Fan Xian began to worry that the Sun family might be scared by this round of bids and not dare to raise the price. The development of the situation was indeed sliding toward a situation Fan Xian did not want to see. When the announcing official yelled out the Ming family's bid of 3.8 million liang of silver, the entire courtyard burst into an uproar. From then on, the door to room B1 never opened again. The Sun family was indeed scared. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the father and son of the Ming family in room A1. He began to think about whether or not the father and son were truly as the Overwatch Council had found and did not participate much in last night's assassination. The person in charge was purely the old matriarch. Assassinating Xia Qifei seemed rash, but when paired with the ferocious bidding today, it could scare off a number of enemies for the Ming family who wanted to take advantage of the chaos. If Ming Qingda was truly someone who could borrow power and even use his own mother, Fan Xian felt that he needed to re-examine him. After the first round of bids came out, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng stroked their beards and smiled. However, Eunuch Huang did not have a beard on his chin, so he appeared comical. At least it could be seen that the two of them were satisfied with the Ming family's move and everyone's reaction. Room B4 was quiet. Through the window lattice, Xia Qifei glanced at Fan Xian with an inquiring gaze. Fan Xian sighed somewhat helplessly and used the palms of his hands to smooth the flying hair at his temples. The meaning of this secret signal was for Xia Qifei to slowly plan. Since the Sun family had backed out, Xia Qifei had to continue bidding. However, he had to control his bidding well. He had to make the Ming family feel pain, but he couldn't be too ruthless. He also had to make the other party take over the first 4 consecutive bids with satisfaction and not suddenly give up and throw these 4 consecutive bids to him. This was a difficult situation. Even if Xia Qifei had the help of a few old officials of the Ministry of Revenue behind him, it was still difficult to deal with it flawlessly. The announcing official once again stood on the stone steps. This happened twice. The anticipated great family battle between the eldest and 7th brother of the Ming family did not happen. The bandits in room B4 completely lost the ferocity of yesterday and carefully bid. Although they were cautious, the price of the first 4 consecutive bids was still slowly raised to a jaw-dropping level. This was, of course, because the Ming family's first round bid was 20% higher than last year's. Another reason was that room B4 was like a sticky candy clinging to the other party. In the end, the successful bidder was still the Ming family. This result was the same as it had been for many years. However, the price they bid was very different from previous years. 12 million liang. Everyone's mouths were wide open as they listened to this price. They thought to themselves that if the palace treasury bidding rule was 5 rounds, Xia Qifei in room B4 and Ming Qingda in room A1 would probably raise this price to twice last year's price. This price was indeed ridiculously high. Fan Xian knew that this could only mean that in previous years, under the eldest princess control, the price of marketing rights had been ridiculously low. At this price, the Ming family would not lose out. Perhaps they would even make a large profit. Of course, this was only if the Ming family still dared to do the pirate business and still dared to smuggle goods into Dongyi under Fan Xian's eyes. Thus, Fan Xian smiled and was very satisfied with this result. The Ming family was just waiting to throw money into this bid this year. Room A1 Ming family, 12 million liang win. The Palace Treasury Transport Company announcer, who had been listless the entire time, announced the largest bid in the dozen years the Palace Treasury had been open for bidding. He finally became spirited. The voice of the bid was powerful and powerful. The word "win" left his mouth and disappeared without delay. It appeared very straightforward. No matter what attitude the merchants had toward the Ming family, they all felt a glimmer of excitement and cheered for this number. On the contrary, the father and son of the Ming family in room A1 did not have any joy on their faces, particularly Ming Qingda, who had a faint worry between his brows. What he was thinking was the same as what Fan Xian was thinking. If they didn't have some shady methods to help them, this 4 consecutive bids would definitely be lost. Most importantly, Xia Qifei seemed to have the help of an expert when he called out his bid, and he had a good grasp of the situation. This bid was 5,120,000 taels of silver, and just the deposit alone would cost him more than 2 million taels of silver. Moreover, the other party's real bid would definitely be at the end. Last night, Ming Garden had gathered silver overnight. In total, the 6 branches had only gathered 600,000 liang. It was far from the 1.35 million liang the old Ming matriarch had set. Furthermore, this 4 consecutive bids had already exceeded Ming Qingda's mental budget by too much. What should they do next? There was still half of Taiping Money House's silver tribute left, but no one knew what would happen next. Ming Qingda's hands gently pressed on the wooden box beside him, deep in thought. Ming Launcher glanced at his tired father and felt his heart ache. He knew that his father had not slept at all last night. He had gone through the night to a few large money houses in Suzhou to transfer silver. It was not until the early hours of the morning that he finally received the amount he could be at ease with. Inside this box was the banknote that Xiaoshang Money House had hastily opened. Do you think the imperial envoy still wants the 4 consecutive bids? Ming Qingda sighed tiredly. Ming Launcher didn't know what to say. The sun had moved, and the palace treasury bidding temporarily came to an end. The bailiffs of the Suzhou government and the transport company brought in food for the various officials and merchants to eat. Although the food provided by the government was not as good as the food in the homes of these wealthy people, these merchants still ate with relish. They gathered around the dispirited Chuanzhou Sun family and asked about something. Everyone was looking forward to the afternoon. That was the final battle. In the morning, the terrifying amount of 5 million liang of silver had already been opened. How dazzling would the afternoon be? No one noticed that Ming Qingda silently walked into the main hall, and I came to the side hall where the major figures were eating. He did not avoid arousing suspicion and smiled slightly. Greetings, Uniquang, Imperial Censor Gua. I have some things I want to report to the Imperial Envoy. I hope the 2 of you will make things easier for me. Uniquang and Guozheng were startled, thinking, what game is this? Does the Ming family want to lean toward Fan Xian in front of their faces? But it was impossible for him to be so open and above board. Ming Qingda had controlled the Ming family for a long time and had many dealings with the officials in court. He had a sense of authority. Uniquang and Guozheng met each other's eyes and deeply trusted him. They smiled and retreated, leaving him and Fan Xian space to talk. There was no one in the hall. Ming Qingda lifted the front of his robe with some difficulty and knelt in front of Fan Xian.
He did not speak.
Fan Xian held a bowl in one hand and chopsticks in the other. He was searching between the dishes for something delicious to eat. His gaze did not even glance in that direction. He only said, the 4 consecutive bids at the back, I will still fight for them. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 371. Fan Xian's chopsticks dug around in the plate. He picked up a piece of beef soaked in sesame oil and placed it on top of the white rice. He slowly brought it to his lips and chewed carefully, savoring it. He still did not pay any attention to Ming Qingda kneeling to the side. Ming Qingda was not a simple character. The meaning this kneeling represented was also not that simple. Fan Xian needed time to think. After he finished thinking, he gently put down his bowl and chopsticks and said, Old Master Ming, you are much older than me. How can I accept this? The imperial envoy's hands were empty and powerless, but Ming Qingda had to stand. The conversation between officials and merchants began very calmly and steadily. Fan Xian gazed at him and said, What is the old master prepared to explain? What kind of explanation could be exchanged for the lives of Fan Xian's subordinates? What would it take for Fan Xian to let the Ming family go? Ming Qingda did not know and did not need to know. Everything he needed was for Fan Xian to temporarily let the Ming family go and buy the necessary buffer time for his family and Jingdo. Right now, the situation was too unclear. Even if he was prepared to be a grass on the wall, he still had to know where the wind was coming from. He was only begging for his stance to be able to make the Imperial Envoy loosen his grip slightly. To make the Imperial Envoy believe him, he also had a strong desire to lean toward his side. Fan Xian did not wait for the scheming and far-sighted old master to reply and said, "Your heart is not sincere, so there is no need to surrender." Ming Qingda's expression was calm, but he sighed and said, "The Imperial Envoy cannot believe me." "It is not that I cannot believe you," Fan Xian lowered his head and said. "Even you can't trust yourself. You've been on that boat for too long. To come down is very difficult. You should know this very well. If you are still on that boat, the other people on the boat will always have to ensure your safety. If you come to my boat, what about the goods you left on the original boat?" Naturally, this goods was not the goods they were talking about. Ming Qingda also knew this in his heart. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he knew it was impossible to convince this young Imperial Envoy. With a trace of tiredness, he self-mockingly begged, "Please show me the way." Fan Xian's gaze continued to linger on the delicacies on the table. After a moment of thought, he quietly said, "You have many brothers. Recently, I heard that Master Xia of Room B4 is also your brother?" Ming Qingda's expression did not change, but his heart began to ache. The Ming family had followed Fan Xian's enemy for too long. If he wanted Fan Xian to truly believe that the Ming family was willing to lean toward him, he had to be confident he could completely control the Ming family in his hands. Xia Qifei was clearly a pawn Fan Xian was using to control the Ming family. If it had been anyone else, Fan Xian would not have accepted this agreement. Fan Xian's words were, without a doubt, giving his own conditions. However, Ming Qingda could not accept these conditions no matter what. Putting aside the fact that Ming Qingda could not let go of his family business, just thinking of Xia Qifei's icy gaze and the wretched whip marks under his clothes, his heart began to twist. In the present situation, the one attacking was the Overwatch Council, and the one defending was the Ming family. Furthermore, the Ming family was retreating step by step. Today, the price increase in the palace treasury was only the first link in a chain of events. Following events followed one after another, and the Ming family was in a precarious position. Only now did Ming Qingda realize that this seemingly young imperial envoy was actually so conservative, cautious, severe, and sinister in his bones. Faced with such a large temptation, he was not moved at all. Only now did he realize that what Fan Xian wanted was far more than he could pay. It was not just 400,000 liang. It was not just the Ming family's secret cooperation in Jiangnan from now on. It was a somewhat arrogant and incomparably arrogant desire for complete control of the palace treasury's production and sales. "Please give me a way out," Ming Qingda said with a pained smile. Earlier, they were talking about a clear path. Now they could only talk about a way out. If the last 4 bids continue like this, the tens of thousands of disciples in the family, as well as the countless servants hired around, will probably not be able to feed the family next year. The Ming family does not lack silver. Fan Xian looked at the master of the Ming family in front of him and admired him more and more. It was clearly threatening him, yet he said it so gently and lowly. It was not harsh at all. On the contrary, it was filled with comfort. In a moment, the last 4 bids, just pretend that the Ming family has spat out the silver they swallowed a few years ago. He tilted his head slightly and narrowed his eyes as he examined the slightly dispirited Ming Qingda. In his heart, he endlessly guessed what this master of the Ming family was planning. "You should know my past. I do not appreciate your methods of selling things in the past. Of course, I am not an unreasonable bandit. As long as you do things more reliably, naturally, I will also be more reliably." The so-called reliably referred to last night's matter. Fan Xian used the tip of his chopsticks to knock against the edge of the porcelain plate, making a crisp clanging sound. In the end, he said, Hold the bowl like a dragon spitting out pearls. Use chopsticks like a phoenix nodding its head. Eat until you're 80% full. If you can't finish, take it away. Being a person and doing things is the same as eating. Your posture must be beautiful, and you must know your limits. This is good. Ming Qingda knew that he would not be able to make any more progress in front of this imperial envoy. Hearing Fan Xian's last words, his heart relaxed slightly. Although he could not believe it completely, he absolutely believed that Fan Xian did not have any intention of forcing the Ming family to collapse. He still wanted to control the Ming family and not destroy it. To control the enormous Ming family. Xia Qifei could not do it, his mother could not do it, only he could. Ming Qingda had this confidence. Thus, in a moment, he would certainly vomit blood because of the last 4 bids. In his heart, he knew that in the days to come, he would still have to discuss things with the imperial envoy. Merchants were least afraid of discussing things. Haggling was their forte. Ming Qingda bowed respectfully to Fan Xian again and retreated. Looking at the slightly hunched and slightly aged back of the master of the Ming family, Fan Xian once again gently placed his chopsticks on the table and narrowed his eyes slightly. Up until now, he still could not see through Ming Qingda's depths. The meaning behind that kneel earlier was too rich. Admit defeat? Ask for peace? Surrender? Make up for last night's matter? If the Ming family truly intended to lean toward him, then the palace treasury's open and above-board situation was, on the contrary, the best place to show their true intentions. The problem was, Fan Xian did not believe that this old man would willingly surrender. He had not played all of his cards, and the Ming family was not at the end of their rope. The painful price that the big tree, which was used to standing on the other side of the river, wanted to be uprooted and moved to this side of the river. It should not be something that the Ming family was willing to pay right now. Why would the other party put on such a lowly posture? He still had the old matriarch above him. Which side the Ming family should lean toward was a major matter that concerned the future of tens of thousands of people in the clan. Ming Qingda should not have the power to make an arbitrary decision. Furthermore, this kneel was not hidden. Someone should have already seen it and would immediately spread. Fan Xian's eyes narrowed even more. Was the other party preparing to play the tragic card? In this world that had not yet produced someone like Bian, perhaps tragic was a feasible move. However, purposely kneeling in front of everyone, how tragic could that be? If it had been any other official, faced with the inclination that Ming Qingda displayed, they would certainly be secretly happy. Only Fan Xian did not think this way. Just as Ming Qingda had expected, he wanted too many things that the Ming family could not afford to give. Furthermore, he had prepared for this matter for a long time. He had the confidence to swallow the Ming family and not accept their surrender. Since Fan Xian could swallow the Ming family at any time, then why should he haggle with the Ming family to obtain their surrender? It was not that he did not want it, it was not that he could not, it was that he disdained it. The cool breeze passed through the door and blew away the remnants of the aroma of food in the courtyard of the palace treasury. It also blew away a sliver of the scent of firecrackers. Only the heavy atmosphere remained unmoved. Tension permeated the courtyard. It was like thousand-year-old ice, like a giant rock at the bottom of a river, difficult to melt in the spring wind, and difficult to move in the great river. The voice of the transport company official in charge of the ceremony had already become hoarse. It wasn't because he spoke too much, nor was it because he drank too little water, but because he was nervous. The merchants who lived along Corridor A and Corridor B could no longer sit still. Separated by the open door lattice, they stood on the high sill of the door and stared nervously outside. In the afternoon, it was the bidding of the palace treasury's last 4 lots. After 2 rounds of bidding, no one cheered. No one even wiped the cold sweat from their foreheads. The Chuanzhou Sun family, who had been scared off by the Ming family in the morning, listened to the price with a deathly pale face. Their eyes were lifeless as they looked outside. They had been scared again by the 2 madmen. All of the merchants felt that today's trip had broadened their horizons. At the same time, they had received a great shock. That was silver. That was silver. Why did the Ming family of room A1 and the Xia family of room B4 dare to throw it out like that? Could it be that in their eyes, those thick banknotes were no different from waste paper? Xiong Bailing of the Ling Nan Xiong family looked outside with bloodshot eyes. He didn't quite believe his ears. He said to the accountant beside him, "Did the announcer make a mistake just now?" The accountant of the Xiong family wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. How could the numbers calculated by the flour hall be wrong? Dear heavens, a few of Master Xia's brothers were killed yesterday. Today, he began to go crazy. The Ming family has also gone crazy. The old Ming master is not a bandit. Xiong Bailing was so nervous that he didn't have time to swallow his saliva. He choked in the middle and almost stumbled. With a flip of his hand, he snatched the teacup from a subordinate's hand and gulped it down. Lowering his voice, he scolded, "Xia Qifei is the 7th Ming master. I think the two of them are fighting for real, brothers fighting against the wall. It is really exciting. It looks like the Ming family are all crazy in their bones." Not only was the announcer's voice trembling, but the Jiangnan merchants were sweating incessantly. Even the three masters sitting in the main hall were beginning to become nervous. Hearing the second round of bids, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng looked at each other. Their faces became deathly white. The two of them had never thought that the last 4 consecutive bids of the palace treasury bidding would be driven up by Fan Xian and the Ming family to such a terrifying level. The Ming family was set to lose money on these 4 consecutive bids, and it would be a huge loss. For Eunuch Huang and Guozheng, the Ming family's income would decrease, and the amount of money that Jiangnan would send to the capital, which could not see the light of day, would also be less, too much. Thinking of this, the gazes the two of them stared at Fan Xian with a bit of hatred. Although Fan Xian used his powerful state of mind to maintain the calm expression on his face, if one was attentive, they would still be able to see that the stiff and starched cuffs of the imperial envoy's purple official robe were slightly trembling. His thin and delicate lips were pressed together tightly, and there was a slight redness under his earlobes. After all, a scene like the one today was rarely seen. The Qing emperor was known as the wealthiest person in the world, but Fan Xian was willing to bet that the Qing emperor, who had never entered the Ministry of Revenue's treasury, had never seen so many banknotes floating around in the air with the announcer's raspy and trembling voice. 11. 5 million liang of silver. 10 years after the founding of the Qing kingdom, the entire nation's financial taxes added together would only amount to 10 million liang. Even for the Qing kingdom, which was now at its peak, such a large amount of silver was still an inconceivable number. If this 10 million liang of silver was used to buy death soldiers in Jiangnan, it was enough to destroy the small vassal states around Dongyi with the wave of a hand. It was enough to become a tyrant. Such a large amount of silver, how many beauties could it be exchanged for? How many war horses and weapons could it be forged? If it was all invested in the people's livelihood, how many li of dikes could it build? How many pots of porridge could it cook? How many halls could it open? How many people could it save? And if it was all changed to silver ingots, how many people could it crush to death? The 5 million liang in the morning was already the highest price in the history of the palace treasury. In the afternoon, it easily broke the record, particularly in the second round of bidding. The Ming family had called out a price that broke 10 million liang. This not only broke the record, but it also broke through everyone's psychological defenses. The reason for such a result was, of course, due to the Ming family's current situation of being besieged both internally and externally, as well as the large amount of gold and silver Fan Xian had borrowed from the northern Qi emperor. The Ming family had to fight for this bid, but Xia Qifei had the ability to hedge against it. All of these factors added together to create such a terrifying number. Fan Xian drank a mouthful of cold tea and forcefully suppressed the emotions in his heart. He made a very secretive hand gesture. "All right, let's stop here. Rest, rest." It was not until now that Fan Xian gradually understood Ming Qingda's thoughts, the emperor's thoughts, and many people's thoughts. When Ming Qingda was fighting for the bid, he obediently followed Fan Xian's plan. For one, he was under pressure from Xinjiang. For another, his thoughts were somewhat mysterious. Either way, he was just giving away silver. If he called out a low price, a portion of the silver he earned would have to be given to Xinyang. If he called out a high price, it was the same as giving the silver to the palace treasury, which was also the same as giving it to the emperor and Fan Xian. Ming Qingda saw things very accurately. He saw that the court needed his silver, so he decided to be ruthless. He wanted to throw out half of his family business. In this way, he won the bid and also suited Fan Xian's wishes. He didn't offend a single person on either side that he couldn't offend. It was a pity that he had offended money. With so much gold and silver, who knew how many years it would take for the Ming family to recover? The so-called spending money to get rid of disasters, the silver the Ming family used to get rid of disasters this time was truly going all in. In Fan Xian's view, the Ming family's economic strength had truly reached a terrifying level. The Qing emperor would not allow such an existence to grow. He would either weaken them or destroy them. This was the emperor's true intention in having Fan Xian go to Jiangnan. Ming Qingda also clearly grasped this intention. However, Sun Wansen had still died back then. Could the Ming family survive? This was something that happened later. Even Fan Xian had no way of completely controlling it. However, Fan Xian felt that the Ming family's performance was very useful. Thus, he made a hand gesture to have Xia Qifei stop bidding. It was not the mischief of a small farmer's mind, nor was it because he felt pity. Rather, Fan Xian knew that the old Ming master's act was certainly not over. 11,500,000 liang of silver was already enough. Fan Xian did not wish for too much discussion in court and bring too many negative evaluations to himself. Seeing the bandit in room B4 stop bidding, everyone, including the officials and merchants, did not feel regret or anger at not being able to watch the show. On the contrary, they all let out a breath at the same time, feeling as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. The bidding this afternoon had been too terrifying. That number was too sensitive. The merchants did not want to cause something bad to happen. The officials also did not want a situation to be dragged to an explosive level. In the flower hall, the joint examination officials of the Ministry of Revenue and the Palace Treasury began to carry out intense examination work. In the end, they confirmed this bid. They used a red brush to carefully and nervously write the final report and handed it to the front hall. The officiating official walked to the stone steps and swallowed a mouthful of saliva to moisten his hoarse and burning throat. In a trembling voice, he said, "Goods from the Southeast Road and Sea Road, for consecutive bids, room A1, Ming family 11. 5 million liang."
Yes.
No one cheered or cried out. Everyone wanted to quickly escape the palace treasury courtyard and get as far away from this number as possible. "Father! Father!" It was at this moment that a cry of surprise came from room A1, which was closest to the main hall. For a moment, everyone stood up from their chairs in shock. Looking in that direction, they didn't know what had happened to the Ming family. "Father, what happened to you? Someone come! Someone come! Quickly come and save him!" From room A1, young Master Ming Launcher's panicked cry for help rang out. Amidst the chaotic sounds, the officials quickly pushed open the door and entered. Only then did they find that the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, had fainted on the ground with an ashen face. Regardless of whether it was the officials or the merchants, they all thought they knew what had happened. Everyone thought that the master of the Ming family had been pressured from inside and outside to forcefully snatch these 4 consecutive bids and had been forced to bid a sky-high price. Thinking that the Ming family might decline because of this sky-high price, the old Ming master was so anxious that he fell unconscious. Everyone knew who had forced the Ming family into such a wretched situation. Thus, the gazes of everyone in the courtyard unconsciously turned toward the imperial envoy standing on the stone steps. Fan Xian was not very shocked. He narrowed his eyes and scolded, "What are you panicking about? Quickly seal the treasury and deposit the silver. After the process is over, quickly send the old Ming master to see a doctor." There was a whole set of procedures for opening and closing the palace treasury. There was also a lot of banknotes in the courtyard, so it took some time before the unconscious old Ming master was carried out. He was moved into the Ming family carriage that Fan Xian had specially allowed to drive to the front door and headed straight for the doctor. No one had expected that the lively palace treasury bidding, after consecutively setting a few records and provoking countless dangers, would have such a bleak and light ending. Watching the Ming family's carriage depart into the distance and thinking of the unknown fate of the master of the Ming family, the Jiangnan merchants couldn't help but sigh endlessly. A glimmer of sympathy grew in their hearts. The people of the Ming family left first. After the merchants went through the inspection, they also left the palace treasury courtyard. What remained were all officials who began to carry out the final finishing touches of the palace treasury. Since it was a business of selling money, naturally, the work of counting the 40% deposit silver banknotes was the most important. The three important figures stood in the flower hall and watched as the Ministry of Revenue and Transport Company officials entered the books and sealed the banknotes. Fan Xian looked at the Ming family's final 4 million liang deposit. At the bottom was a thick stack of banknotes from Zhaoshang Money House. His eyes narrowed slightly and knew that the matter had finally been completed. Originally, in the plan, the last 4 consecutive bids would force the Ming family to use the banknotes from Zhaoshang Money House. Fan Xian would purposely make things difficult for them. After all, Zhaoshang's credibility was not as good as Tianxia's. At that time, Eunuch Huang and Guozheng would certainly speak up for the Ming family. Thus, Fan Xian would be able to remove himself even more cleanly. However, he had not thought that Ming Qingda would do things so straightforwardly and efficiently. Fan Xian was too lazy to smear the small details. However, in the end, Ming Qingda fainted. Pretend. Keep pretending. Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart, but his face carried a sympathetic expression. He sighed to Eunuch Huang beside him and said, "The Ming family won the bid with great difficulty. However, the old Ming master is still old and unable to withstand such joy. Instead, he fainted. It is best if this happy event doesn't become a funeral." Eunuch Huang, who was currently rubbing his fingers and drooling as he looked at the banknotes, still a little nervous, heard the imperial envoy's words. In his shock, he almost broke his fingers. He opened his mouth to curse, but he didn't dare. He thought to himself, what kind of person would make such sarcastic remarks after playing with someone? Eunuch Huang huffed angrily and didn't say anything. Guozheng smiled insincerely and said, "This year, the palace treasury's income is a full 80% higher than in previous years. When this gets back to Jingdo, the emperor will certainly reward Sir Fan Jr. greatly. In the future, becoming a king or marquis is just around the corner." Given Fan Xian's identity and the power he currently held, becoming a king or marquis in the future was a sure thing. He also didn't want to listen to Guozheng's flattery. He smiled coldly and said, "It's all thanks to all of you and the Jiangnan merchants who sympathize with the court. They would rather lose their hard-earned capital to supplement the palace treasury. As for me, in this matter, I did not play much of a role." Guozheng was stifled. He thought to himself, the Ming family almost sold their pants today. Wasn't it all because of you? And you still have the face to say I didn't play much of a role? He huffed coldly and didn't say anything else. He only cursed endlessly in his heart. Pretend. Keep pretending. Monthly tickets come quick. Chapter 372. Haha, I'm not pretending, and no one punished me to kneel on the CPU or hit me with a stick. Monthly votes are a bonus. If I have them, I will be happy. My attitude in this area is so good that it angers both men and gods. Really, keep pulling for votes. Xia Mingji, it's so scary. Do you know how the copper wire the Great Prince pulled when he killed Huma was invented? Isn't that made of iron? The difference isn't that big, did you know? To be honest, Northern Qi really did not have such a thing. The Northern Qi ruler and officials were most interested in the military products of the Qing Kingdom Palace Treasury's 3 workshops. It was not easy for one side of the conversation to bring this up. The girl on the other side felt a glimmer of joy and said sincerely, "I don't know." "Oh, copper wire is very difficult to pull," the warm and gentle voice sighed. The gentle voice sighed and said, I heard that the merchants in Jiangnan were fighting for a piece of copper coin, and they pulled it out by force. The joke itself was amusing, but coming from his mouth, it seemed rather cold. So, the girl only quirked her lips. He then asked, "Do you know how the tunnel from Sha Lake to the river in Shaja was dug?" The girl shook her head. She didn't really want to play with him on these things. The person shook his head and said, "Because Jiangnan merchants dropped a copper coin into a rat hole in the dam." Haiding looked at Fan Xian, who was telling a joke. She looked at him quietly for a long time before saying, "I can understand these two jokes. I just don't know what you're trying to say." Fan Xian scratched at his slightly itchy and painful neck. Cece had not been in good spirits these 2 days. Every day, when she combed her hair, she used too much force and pulled too hard at the back of her head, so there were some red spots. As he scratched, he said, "These two jokes tell us that for merchants, being stingy is always a virtue worthy of praise, and profit is always an irresistible temptation." These were 2 jokes he had heard about Jews in his previous life. Using them on Jiangnan merchants at this time was not too strange. He turned around and pointed at his back to Haiding. Just now, he had scratched himself, but the area of the itch had quickly expanded. It had immediately run to the center of the heavenly assassin's back. Although Fan Xian's little tricks could easily dig there with his palm, it didn't feel good.
So he pointed at his vest.
Haiding glared at him, but her hand had already reached out, gently scratching his back through his clothes. Feeling the miraculous hand that could easily defeat the second priest using a supreme heart to scratch his itch, Fan Xian felt his entire body relax. He gave a comfortable moan and continued, "Being stingy is the nature of merchants. Ming Qingda being so willing to cut his own flesh is a bit unexpected. Furthermore, this matter concerns profits. Next year, I will certainly have to appease the Sun family of Chuanzhou and the merchants who lost out this year, so I will have to trouble you to tell your emperor that at most next year, I will be able to maintain this year's share. Any more will be difficult." Haiding nodded. Immediately after, she continued to ask, "How are you going to deal with the Ming family? It looks like you are very satisfied with Ming Qingda's attitude." Fan Xian shook his head and said seriously, "His attitude does not completely represent the Ming family's attitude. The matter of that night has not ended, and I cannot stop. The Ming family's current injuries are all on the economy. In the next year, just by relying on the palace treasury shipping goods to block him, I can make his family continue to bleed, but the Ming family's entire body is still relatively healthy. If I want to eat them all in one bite, it is impossible. Thus, as long as I am in Jiangnan, I will go every few days to cut a piece of flesh." Perhaps this was the so-called nibbling away. However, as Haiding listened, she couldn't help feeling sorrow for Ming Qingda. The old Ming master had put on a low profile, but he still had no way of controlling the execution of Fan Xian's valiant plan. Seeming to guess what she was thinking, Fan Xian explained, "The Ming family will certainly not sit and wait for death. The problem is, the plan set by Xiaoyan this time is not the same as dealing with the Cui family. The Overwatch Council's methods are all methods that can be seen. Everything I am doing is completely in accordance with Qing law. This is not a conspiracy, it is an open plot. Faced with the difference in strength, the Ming family cannot carry out a direct counterattack. Don't think that Ming Qingda is purely trying to keep the peace. He is also wasting time and waiting for the situation in the capital to change." He emphasized his tone and said, "For the Ming family, the situation in Jingdo must change. Otherwise, they can only wait to be eaten up by the court." Haiding continued in a quiet voice, "Thus, you won't let them continue to wait peacefully. Instead, you have to do your best to weaken their strength before the situation in Jingdo changes." "Correct," Fan Xian said expressionlessly. "Everything will be done according to the rules. My only worry is that the Ming family's reputation is so good that it is difficult to understand. I can't find any problems in the palace treasury transport company accounts. The other party's ability to smooth out traces is too powerful presently. There's been no more news from that island. It seems that someone is helping them cover it up. Faced with such a seemingly gentle and virtuous large family, if I, or the Overwatch Council, push the Ming family too hard, and the Ming family puts on an overly pitiful attitude. Perhaps the Jiangnan scholars and people will retaliate. You are not a person who cares about other people's discussions, Haideng said with a smile. Fan Xian also smiled. These words are true. However, even if I don't care, it doesn't mean the emperor doesn't care. The emperor wants to leave his name in history and also wants his power to be permanent. This has always been a troublesome matter. If it wasn't because of this, the court would have too many ways to directly flatten the Ming family. Why hasn't it done anything yet? Isn't it because they are afraid of leaving an impression in people's hearts that the emperor is heartless and the court is sinister? They are afraid of leaving a dishonorable mark in the history books. Is the Qing emperor this kind of person? Haideng asked with confusion. Believe me, Fan Xian forced a smile and said, the emperor is indeed a person who cares about his reputation. Otherwise, when the heavens sent an auspicious sign last time, he wouldn't have had to fight with your emperor for that breath of air. This time, the emperor sent me down to Jiangnan to subdue the Ming family. Of course, he hopes that I can do it beautifully and trample the Ming family to death without leaving behind any bad reputation. If, at that time, the people of Jiangnan and even under heaven all feel injustice for the Ming family, if those powers in Jingdo make another ruckus, even if the emperor is heartless enough to let me be a black dog, he will still be forced to summon me back to the capital. Since it is so, today is already the 4th day after the palace treasury bidding. Why haven't you done anything? Haideng asked curiously. Fan Xian smiled and said, Who says I haven't done anything? I have put in a lot of thought into the Baoiwe brothel matter. Speaking of Baoiwe brothel, Haideng felt a bit strange. She sighed and said, It's one thing for you to borrow silver from me to repair the river works, but the silver of the Qi kingdom, you're using it to open a brothel. If this news gets back to Shangjing, I'm afraid the emperor will laugh me to death. Fan Xian knew that this northern Qi saint girl always felt uncomfortable about him opening a brothel. He said seriously, The river works are a good deed. As you know, the work I am about to begin settling down the refugees is also a good deed. In reality, you don't know that opening a brothel is also a good deed. Haideng was very confused. What did a brothel forcing women to do such pitiful things have to do with doing a good deed? Humanity's 2 oldest professions, one is an assassin and the other is a prostitute. Fan Xian snapped his fingers and pointed at his back, indicating for Haideng not to stop scratching his back. You can't change this. I can't change it. Even my mother can't change it. Since it is so, this business will certainly continue to exist forever. Then, we might as well take control of this business in our own hands and set down some procedures to do our best to protect the interests of those pitiful women. Fan Xian first said Gulong's famous words and then repeated the words he had used to convince Shi Chanli. Then, he solemnly concluded, I open a brothel to protect those prostitutes. If I blindly place morality above my head and ignore it, cover my eyes, and pretend there is no such thing in this world, then that is truly not having a benevolent heart and not treating those prostitutes as people. When Fan Xian specifically talked about the various new policies of Baoiwe brothel, such as doctors and monthly leave, Haitong's hand that was tickling Fan Xian had already stopped. She looked at the back of his head with slight shock. It was as if she had not thought that what Fan Xian said was not empty lies and that he was actually doing these things. When she heard the last sentence, the admiration on Haitong's face was immediately hidden. In a quiet voice, she said, Enji's words make sense. Fan Xian turned his head in surprise. He had not expected her to reply so seriously. This was not a good feeling. It was as if Su Jiling was persuading a nun. He shook his head and chased this sad and sorrowful association out of his mind. Without rhyme or reason, he said, Duo, I'm sorry. This time, it was Haitong's turn to make a sound of surprise and agreement. Fan Xian said, A few days ago, you and I separated a bit. After the matter, I thought about it. This is mainly my problem. Of course, there is also your problem. But, in the end, it is my problem. Although Haideng did not really understand what he wanted to say, nor did she understand this strange sentence pattern that took up too many words and filled with rubbish, she could still easily connect it to the old road outside Shangjing in northern Qi. The young man in front of her had once said something about the sun at 8 or 9 o'clock. The world was yours and mine. A faint smile rose to the corners of her lips. Fan Xian clapped his hands and stared into her eyes. I crave honesty between friends, but I am not honest enough with you. So, this is my problem. Ever since you left northern Qi and came to Jiangnan, you have to stare at so much silver every day and worry about how I will be. The pressure on you is too great, making it hard for your state of mind to calm. You are not as good as you were in the beginning and cannot successfully resolve this pressure. This is your problem. But you have pressure, I have pressure. In the end, this pressure is caused by me, so this problem is also mine. Haiding smiled and covered her mouth, only revealing a pair of eyes as bright as a clear lake. Fan Xian was slightly startled and unconsciously said, "Your eyes are pretty." There was a third between the two of them. Fan Xian chuckled and said, "I didn't think you would have a little girl side, but in the end, you still haven't told me how old you are." Seeing Haitong's slightly angry expression, he noncommittally waved his hand and said, "Change the topic. Didn't you just ask why you haven't made a move against the Ming family these 2 days? You said you were busy with the brothel's renovation work." Haiding also knew how to joke, but it was a bit shaky. Fan Xian nodded and smiled. "That is one thing. Of course, the most important problem is I am waiting for Xia Qifei to recover." On the evening of March 26th, in the area west of Suzhou where salt merchants and royal merchants gathered, red lanterns hung high and firecrackers rang out. It was a joyous atmosphere. The Jiangnan water bandits commander Xia Qifei, who had been in the limelight during the palace treasury matter, had officially bought a courtyard in Suzhou. Today was the first time he had opened his doors to welcome guests. In reality, the true wealthy of Jiangnan all had their own large courtyards outside of Suzhou in the Jiangnan water villages. They usually lived in their own manors and rarely stayed in the city. However, each of their families had a luxurious residence in the western part of Suzhou because this was a symbol of status and a display of the family's power. The land in the west of the city was very expensive. Furthermore, no one was willing to sell property, so not everyone had the right to live there. Xia Qifei was able to successfully open his own courtyard. This meant that after the palace treasury matter, Jiangnan had already recognized his right. Of course, Xia Qifei, who had moved into Suzhou, had to wash himself clean and not leave a trace of evil on his face. Thus, he could not move in as the commander of the Jiangnan water bandits. His current identity had already changed. He had become the owner of Xia Mingji. Xia Mingji was also a newly opened business. The meaning hidden in the name was clear to the merchants who had come to congratulate them. The Ming family was very eye-catching. However, they didn't know whether or not the Ming family would send someone today. They heard that after the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, fainted that day, it took him a whole 2 days to wake up. His body was very weak. A carriage stopped in front of the Xia manor. The carriage was completely black and did not have any emblems. However, the guards staring at it like tigers watching their prey, as well as the sudden increase of strangers on the street, all made clear the identity of this carriage. The merchants surrounding the door of the Xia manor quickly walked over and bowed toward the carriage. They then eagerly prepared to welcome the person in the carriage. Inside the carriage, Fan Xian said to the third prince in an even voice, "Your Highness, do you really want to join in on the excitement? It doesn't seem very appropriate." The third prince smiled sweetly and said, "I know what teacher is worried about. However, since teacher is not avoiding suspicion today to help Xia Qifei, adding one more student is nothing." Fan Xian smiled. He knew that this little guy had not forgotten Yi Guiping's teachings at all times. Regardless of life or death, he would be tied to him, not only psychologically but also in public opinion. One big and one small, the two nobles of Suzhou reservedly got off the carriage. It drew a clamor and rising of cheers from outside the carriage. Fan Xian stood in the room and used his hand to touch the clearly newly made study table. Smelling the faint scent of clear wood, He thought to himself that this world was nothing special, but the newly renovated house did not have the smell of methane. This benefit was enough. Suddenly, his heart jumped. He realized that it had been a long time since he had thought of the things of his original world. He didn't know what this meant. Perhaps he was getting more and more used to this world, but why was there an unknown desire in his heart that kept scratching and making his heart itch? He didn't know what exactly he was longing for. It wasn't tobacco, it wasn't porn, he didn't know what it was. He shook off his daze and found that Xia Qifei and the third prince were both staring at him in a daze. He couldn't help smiling self-mockingly and saying, "Qingcheng, you're injured. Sit by yourself and don't mind me. I often zone out." Knowing that the imperial envoy and the third prince had arrived together, the Jiangnan merchants who had come to the front yard to offer their congratulations were all secretly envious of Xia Qifei's luck and shocked at the imperial envoy and the third prince's actions of not avoiding others. They also didn't dare make too much noise, so the sounds of drinking and merrymaking in the front yard did not disturb the conversation in the study in the back garden. Xia Qifei was actually very shocked at Fan Xian's arrival. Furthermore, he had come with the third prince. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "Nowadays, everyone in Jiangnan knows of our relationship. I think Jingdo should also know. If that's the case, why are you still trying to hide it?" Xia Qifei glanced at the third prince. Thinking of the rumors on the streets, he didn't avoid them and said straightforwardly, "Commissioner, I'm afraid I've brought you trouble." "What trouble?" Fan Xian gazed at him warmly. "You work for the court. It looks like you're doing well recently, but in reality, you've suffered quite a bit." Xia Qifei thought of the brothers who had died that night, and his expression darkened slightly. "Are your injuries better?" Fan Xian asked. Xia Qifei respectfully replied, "Much better." Fan Xian thought for a moment and then slowly said, "You don't have to worry too much. Concerning the Ming family, my attitude is very firm. Perhaps the progress will be a bit slower, but don't think that I have been fooled by someone's attitude." The news of the current master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, kneeling in the courtyard of the palace treasury manor and fainting after winning the bid had long spread throughout Suzhou and beyond. Thus, as the knife in Fan Xian's hand, what Xia Qifei was most worried about was whether the hand holding the knife would suddenly change its mind. Hearing Fan Xian make a promise, Xia Qifei's spirit rose involuntarily despite his injured body. Revenge and taking back the Ming family was his greatest wish. If he didn't have Fan Xian's help, he would never have been able to do it. Fan Xian looked at his expression and said in a low voice, "You work for the court, so the court will support you. To put it more bluntly, since you are my person, I must openly announce this to the world. There is no need to remove this relationship or hide it. In the future, when you work in Jiangnan and send goods to the north with this layer of influence, it will all be much easier." Xia Qifei's expression appeared to be moved, but he felt a bit terrified in his heart. He didn't know why the commissioner was in such a rush to bring this matter to light. Xia Qifei still thought he was working for the court. He didn't understand that just because Fan Xian used him did not mean that the court used him. To have Xia Qifei send goods to the north and use the Cui family's old route to connect with Fan Xizha in the north. Under the protection of Fan Xian in the south and the emperor in the north, he would reopen that smuggling route. This was Fan Xian's true goal. Presently, the south had the Overwatch Council secretly managing it, and the north had the provost of the Discipline Commission Wei Hua. He was both an old acquaintance of Fan Xian and someone the northern Qi emperor trusted. This route was already flawless. The only thing that needed to be hammered a few more times was Xia Qifei himself at the beginning. Fan Xian had come under the guise of discussion. He wanted to use the words of the people to firmly bind Xia Qifei to his side. After today, no matter who it was, no one would believe that Xia Qifei was not Fan Xian's trusted aide. In the future, when the smuggling began, even if Xia Qifei wanted to betray Fan Xian, probably no one would believe him. Furthermore, Fan Xian's enemies would also target Xia Qifei. The Jiangnan restaurant was already a good start. This could only force Xia Qifei to hold Fan Xian even tighter. Using external aggression to lock one's heart and tie people onto the boat, the The third prince was pestering to get on the boat, but it was impossible for Xia Qifei not to go. The day after tomorrow. Before Fan Xian left the Xia manor, he gave one last order to Xia Qifei. The required procedures should be complete. When the time comes, it will be your turn. Xia Qifei felt slightly excited. Although he knew that the commissioner only needed him to attract the Ming family's attention, he could, in the end, roar his voice in the Suzhou government. It seemed that he was getting closer and closer to his life's goal. However, you also understand. Fan Xian sighed and patted his shoulder. There are no precedents in Qing law for this kind of thing. The other party is the eldest son of the eldest branch. According to the law, he is taking advantage. Even if the council helps, it is unlikely to obtain the desired result. There are many ways to get back what has been lost. Don't be anxious, and don't be overly disappointed. Xia Qifei's heart trembled slightly. He always felt that the young commissioner in front of him was not just talking about the Ming family. Between the upper and lower levels, it seemed that because of the word family property, a certain harmony had been created. He raised his hands in a salute and said, moved, I do not deserve to trouble you because of my matters. You deserve it, Fan Xian said sympathetically. From the beginning, it was made clear that I am also a person who prioritizes profit. Don't be overly concerned. The more he emphasized profit, the more Xia Qifei felt he was sincere. He repeatedly bowed and saw him and the third prince out of the manor. More accurately speaking, Fan Xian and the third prince only stood for a moment in the Xia manor before leaving. The entire process was less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea. However, the attitude and determination they displayed would certainly pass through the mouths of the merchants and officials and reach the ears of the master of the Ming family. After the carriage left the Xia manor, it was not in a hurry to return to Hua Garden. Instead, it headed toward the north of the city. There were many Jianghu heroes in the north of Suzhou, so the guards beside the carriage also became nervous. What day is the day after tomorrow? The third prince opened his innocent and harmless eyes and asked Fan Xian. Fan Xian replied, Xia Qifei will enter the Suzhou government and sue the Ming family for stealing the family property. If you want to know what happens after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 373. On the quiet streets of Suzhou, the clear sound of the carriage wheels drowned out the shocked cry from inside the carriage. The third prince said after a moment of shock, This lawsuit can still be fought? Why not? Fan Xian smiled slightly. Whether or not we can win is another matter, but we must fight. The third prince was, after all, only 9 years old.
He was still a child.
Hearing of this matter, he became interested and said, Sir, when the time comes, let's go watch the excitement. I heard that Xia Qifei's birth mother was beaten to death alive by the current old Ming matriarch. Fan Xian sighed. This is a family property lawsuit, not an old murder case. It's only about the articles on Qing law and documents. There's no meaning to it. The third prince asked curiously, Sir, there's no guarantee?
No.
Fan Xian smiled bitterly and shook his head. If there was a guarantee, then why bother with all these tricks? I just hope to drag it out, the longer the better. The third prince sat back down unhappily in his chair and looked at the unfamiliar street scene that passed by. He unconsciously asked, If you're not going back to Hua Garden at this time, where are you going? Fan Xian gazed at him and said, The emperor had you follow me to learn, and you have always been diligent. Since you have come out with me today, I will go along the way to learn something you will definitely need to learn in the future. The third prince didn't know what Fan Xian was talking about. The carriage went from the west side of the city to the north side. It did not enter the place where the men were always circling. Instead, it quietly followed an alley and turned west. Using the cover of the night and the secret vigilance of the members of the Qinian unit behind it, it shook off any possible tailing and disappeared into Suzhou. The carriage stopped outside a private residence. The location was secluded and difficult to notice. Gauda came down from the driver's seat. His hand grasped the hilt of the long knife on his back. After coldly and carefully observing for a while, he made a fist to signal that it was safe. Only then did Fan Xian lead the third prince's subordinates out of the carriage. The sixth bureau assassins at Fan Xian's side were all recovering from their injuries. Fan Xian was not willing to let the only two people who were unharmed risk their lives again. Thus, their personal safety was completely handed over to the Tiger Guards and the Chinian unit. He acted with increasing caution. Walking along the quiet doorway, the third prince felt a little creeped out. It was dark all around, but he could smell a trace of smoke. This kind of feeling made his hair stand on end. The child unconsciously tightened his grip on Fan Xian's palm. He entered the house and turned into another room. It was a bedroom, and everything was there. There was a big bed and a dressing table. There was even a couple sleeping on the bed. The third prince opened his mouth wide, unable to make a sound for a long time. He thought to himself, "What kind of joke is this?" Fan Xian was slightly startled. He turned his head to look at the Overwatch Council official leading the way. The official's countenance did not change. He walked straight to the bedside and pulled the hook on the bed frame. With a click, the curtain above the bed was slowly pulled open, revealing a slanting path downwards. He then made a gesture of invitation. As he did all of this, the couple on the bed only moved in a little and did not have any reaction. They didn't even glance at the people by the bedside. It was as if they were blind and deaf. It was also as if Fan Xian and his group were all like ghosts. Fan Xian looked at this scene and couldn't help but smile bitterly. He scratched his head. He kept on feeling that it was like some kind of novel he had read in his previous life. Unexpectedly, it had become reality in front of his eyes. This private residence was a secret residence the fourth bureau of the Overwatch Council had placed in Suzhou. At this time, the third prince knew where he had come. Holding Fan Xian's hand, he carefully walked toward the underground tunnel. His heart was beating like a drum. In a trembling voice, he said, "Teacher, although I am a prince, according to the rules of the court, I do not have the right to know about the secret residences of the Overwatch Council." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Every city has 3 to 5 secret residences. It's not like it's something strange. As for the rules, with me here, no one can say anything." He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. After Chen Pingping's personal letter, he had the absolute power of the Overwatch Council. Hearing Fan Xian say this, the third prince relaxed slightly. Under the contrast of the dim light, he continued to move forward. The fourth bureau's residence in Suzhou was not the largest, but it was the most secretive. Before long, they came to a secret room. The light in the room was quiet, and the dim light illuminated the somewhat cramped room. There was a charcoal fire in the room, 2 soldering irons, a few boxes of medicine, a few benches, and more than a dozen long and short metal-sharp objects of different shapes. It was the standard preparation for extorting a confession. Particularly when paired with the 2 dying and bloody people on the torture rack, it was clear. Fan Xian sniffed this familiar and intimate scent and couldn't help but sniff. He felt the third prince's hand tighten. He couldn't help but smile in his heart. This child did sinister things in the palace and Jingdo, but he was still a child. He had never seen such a slaughterhouse-like scene. The fourth bureau officials who were extorting confessions had already taken off their clothes because of the heat. They were working with their upper bodies bare. Seeing their superiors suddenly come to the secret residence, they jumped in fright and hurriedly looked around for clothes to wear. Fan Xian waved his hand to stop their movements and said, "Continue working. How are the interrogations coming along?" An official was wearing only one sleeve and wretchedly walked to the table in the corner of the room. He carefully took out a few pieces of paper. They were the results of the extortion. Fan Xian took them and glanced at them. He couldn't help furrowing his brows. It was because he had been thinking about the Juanshan conference that, in order to make good use of time, he had personally come to see the situation of the interrogation. Unexpectedly, a few days had already passed, and there was still not much progress. The 2 people who had been captured by the Overwatch Council were the 2 swallow-like assassins who had tried to kill Xia Qifei in front of the Jiangnan restaurant on the night of March 22nd. That day, These two assassins had been poisoned by the swordsman of the Sixth Bureau. They had seen the opportunity quickly and wanted to escape. Unexpectedly, along the way, they had been knocked unconscious by Haidang. Afterward, Fan Xian unceremoniously took them and hid them in a secret residence. He tortured and interrogated them. He wanted to know a little inside information about the Juanshang Conference. For the Overwatch Council, the Juanshang Conference was truly mysterious. A power that even the Overwatch Council could not grasp made Fan Xian worry. A loosely organized organization? Yet, they could use the second priest of the Qing Temple as a chess piece? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and looked at the results of his subordinates' interrogation. These two assassins were famous killers in the Jiangnan area. Their martial arts were powerful and their actions were sinister. However, it seemed that they did not know much about the Juanshang Conference. They had only been bought by the Ming family, with silver to do things. Wake them up. He shook his head helplessly. An official brought a small bottle to the noses of the two people on the rack and had them sniff it. The two of them struggled weakly. Their muscles twisted and fresh blood seeped out of their wounds again. They also woke up. The two assassins forced their eyes open. Terror seeped through their blurred eyes. They had long lost the toughness they had when they were first captured. It looked like they had been tortured badly by the cruel officials of the Fourth Bureau of the Overwatch Council these few days. Fan Xian and the third prince sat on the long, not-so-clean bench. Fan Xian flipped through the paper in his hand and quietly asked, "The Sir Zhou you speak of, what does he have to do with the Juanshang Conference?" The two assassins knew the Overwatch Council's methods. Since they were not going to be martyrs, they rushed to answer. In a hoarse voice, they roared, Sir Zhou is the accountant of the Juanshang Conference. As for what exactly he does inside, I truly do not know." Fan Xian raised his head in surprise. "Is Sir Zhou not the head housekeeper of the Ming family?" One of the assassins said in a trembling voice, "I have only heard of it once. Concerning the Juanshang Conference, I truly only know this one thing. After enduring for a few days, you two are still quite spirited. It looks like you haven't suffered too much." Fan Xian shook his head. A glimmer of despair flashed through the eyes of the two assassins. The Overwatch Council officials began to use torture again, carrying out this unaesthetic yet repetitive and uninteresting work. Wretched cries rose and fell in the torture room. They were incomparably mournful, but they had no way of reaching the ground. Fan Xian did not cover the third prince's eyes. The third prince looked at the scene. His face was deathly pale, but he forced his head not to turn to the side. He only looked at this bloody scene and suddenly felt the food in his stomach want to rush out of his throat uncontrollably. His chest was extremely depressed. Fan Xian took out a box of ointment from his clothes and used the tip of his index finger to wipe it. He carefully rubbed it under the third prince's nose. In a quiet voice, he said, "I have already reported the matter of the Juanshang Conference to the Emperor. For the other party to be so daring, Your Highness will be able to understand what kind of daring they have. For today's enemies and future enemies, there are some methods we must learn, but we must not revel in them." The third prince knew what Fan Xian was teaching him. On the other side, the fresh flesh on the assassins' chests had already mixed with blood and turned into balls of charred flesh that sizzled on a metal plate. You cannot view using torture and cruel officials as the best way to maintain the rule of the court. You cannot rely on these methods. Even if you weave a wide net, there will still be fish that slip through. Torture and extort confessions, but you still cannot obtain all the information you need, Fan Xian said calmly. The way of governing is to balance leniency and severity. If you believe, then you do not doubt. If you doubt, then you do not use it. Leniency is the foundation. The rest are just small methods to pave the way. The third prince's nose wriggled with a cool smell. He lost some of his malice and understood Fan Xian's meaning. The very different attitudes toward Ming Qingda and Xia Qifei clearly illustrated Fan Xian's method of doing things. If you believe, then you do not doubt. If you doubt, then you do not use it. Coming to watch the execution tonight was to let him understand that not all powerful methods would be effective. It's not bad to be able to get information about the Ming family, Fan Xian comforted his subordinates. Take care of the offerings and heal these two people's wounds. They'll be useful in the future. After leaving the secret residence the fourth bureau of the Overwatch Council had set up in Suzhou, Fan Xian's mood was heavy. At first, he had hoped to be able to find traces of the Juanshang conference. Unexpectedly, he couldn't get anything out of these two assassins. He could only teach the third prince a few things along the way. In reality, it was just to cover up his own helpless awkwardness. Sitting in the carriage on the way back to Hua Garden, he thought carefully. After all, the Overwatch Council was the Emperor's Special Forces organization. There were many things that could not be done openly. Thus, in terms of organization, there were innate limitations. For example, there could not be too many people. Thus, far away in the strategic town of Jiangnan, although it had always been an important area of supervision for the Fourth Bureau, there was still a clear lack of people. If they wanted to investigate such a mysterious organization as the Juanshang Conference, which floated in the clouds, the Overwatch Council's power in Jiangnan was far from enough. At this moment, Fan Xian very much wished that Yan Bingyun could be by his side. However, he also understood that Yan Bingyun was currently in charge of the Fourth Bureau and could not easily leave the capital. Furthermore, he needed Yan Bingyun to help Deng Ziyu with most of the work in the First Bureau. Even if Wang Qinian was here, things might be a lot easier. He sighed. Yang Jimei had not only given Hua Garden to the imperial envoy Fan Xian with both hands, she had also kept the servants, women, and cooks in the garden. After the Overwatch Council's inspection, they confirmed that these people were clean, so Fan Xian did not refuse this good intention. Thus, other than everything close to her, Cici began to enjoy the treatment of a young mistress. Although she was not used to it, there was nothing she could do. The pitiful little girls Fan Xian had bought on his way to Jiangnan also did not have the opportunity to do any rough work. They were truly raised like serving girls in a large family. What was particularly worthy of praise was the chef Yang Jimei had left behind. His standards were so high that it could make the royal chefs in the palace blush with shame. Every day, his 3 meals were cooked in a variety of ways. It made Fan Xian reluctant to go out to taste the delicacies of Jiangnan. He was willing to stay in the garden. Cici liked this chef the most, and the third prince hated him the most. That morning, Fan Xian, Haidang, and the third prince were sitting around a small table eating porridge made with old corn, diced ham, and western vegetables. The color of the porridge was not very pretty, but the completely mismatched flavors mixed together made it very delicious and strange. Fan Xian drank 3 bowls in a row. Cici, who was standing to the side, scooped out the porridge in time. At this moment, a few people walked in from outside the yard, accompanied by a tiger guard. They came to the courtyard and looked at Fan Xian and the third prince sitting around the table. They then glanced at Haidang and couldn't help but be shocked. Fan Xian looked at the people who had stepped over the threshold and was even more shocked. The people who had come were Sangwon and Deng Ziyu. Sangwon had already come down to Jiangnan to help him. However, what was Deng Ziyu doing in Jiangnan instead of staying together in the capital? When Fan Xian saw clearly the person standing between the two of them, he unconsciously stood up in shock and cried out, "Dabao, why are you here?" Indeed, the fat man standing carelessly between Sangwon and Deng Ziyu with a dazed expression, looking around fearfully. If it wasn't a Bao, who else could it be? Fan Xian quickly walked forward in fear. He grabbed his brother-in-law's hand with one hand and asked Deng Ziyu, "What's going on? Where's Wanner?" Deng Ziyu's expression was tired. He smiled bitterly and said, "Madam's health hasn't been good recently, so she temporarily delayed coming down to Jiangnan. However, this uncle heard that he was coming to see you, so he kept making a fuss at home. The minister sent me to bring this uncle to Jiangnan." "Nonsense," Fan Xian sighed. Immediately after, his heart tightened. He asked anxiously, "Wanner's health isn't good?" "Oh, it's nothing." Sangwon, who had a warm smile on her face and the flesh on her cheeks, replied, "The princess has probably caught the wind and is a bit tired. She'll be fine after resting for a few days." She took out 2 letters from her clothes and handed them to Fan Xian. "These are letters for you." Fan Xian accepted them and glanced at them. They were written by his father and Wanner. He didn't have time to read them. He first put them in his clothes and said angrily, "Father, what do you mean? Jiangnan is in chaos right now. Why did you send Dabao here?" Dabao suddenly grinned and pulled on Fan Xian's ear. "Little Xian, you hid for so long in this hide-and-seek. You're really good." The third prince, who was holding the bowl of porridge and staring curiously at the door, found that the always scary Fan Xian was actually like this in front of this big idiot. He couldn't resist anymore. With a splutter, he spat out the mouthful of porridge he had been holding in his mouth. Deng Ziyu smiled awkwardly and quickly went forward with sanguine to bow to the third prince. He didn't dare look at Fan Xian's wretched appearance. Presumably, these two had also been annoyed by Dabao's antics along the way. Since Dabao had come, there would certainly be people to serve him along the way. Cici understood and quickly left the garden to settle those people down. Fan Xian had also finally calmed Dabao down. He first settled him in the back garden and had the little serving girls, who had nothing to do all day, go and eat melon seeds with him. Only now did the front hall quiet down. Haiding rose and bowed slightly. She then left the front hall. She knew that Fan Xian must have a lot to talk about with Deng Ziyu. After Deng Ziyu entered the hall, it was as if he hadn't seen this country girl. Since she had taken the initiative to bow to him, he still had to quickly return the bow. Sitting at the table, Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "Last night, I was thinking that there are indeed few people by my side. It's good that you came, but what about the capital? Suryan Jr. is watching over the capital. After receiving the council report you sent back to the capital, the director sent me to bring some people over to help," Deng Ziyu explained. "Also, the thing you wanted to prepare took the second and third core a few months to complete, so I might as well deliver it to you on my way." Fan Xian shook his head and said, "I thought someone else would deliver it. I didn't think it would be you." He glanced at the third prince beside him, who was eating porridge and eavesdropping. He coughed and asked the young master to leave. After the third prince left gloomily, Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "When you came in earlier, why was your expression so strange?" Deng Ziyu glanced around and smiled bitterly. "When I left the capital, the rumors in Jingdo were too fierce. They all said that you and the northern Qi Saint girl, Haidang, would travel together, sit together, and sleep together. The court couldn't stop discussing it. Furthermore, you are now fixated on the palace treasury, so you have to avoid suspicion. The officials in court were preparing to use this matter to attack you. I didn't think that when I entered Hua Garden today, I would see that girl. Only then did I know that the rumors were true. I couldn't help but worry." "Sleep together?" Fan Xian smiled coldly. "Only those people could think of that. Let's not talk about it. Let me see what you brought." Deng Ziyu carefully took out a flat box from his clothes and handed it to Fan Xian's hand. Fan Xian lifted the lid and carefully examined the piece of paper lying quietly in the middle of the box. The paper was slightly yellowish-white. The edges were slightly curled, and it could be seen that it was quite old. The handwriting on the paper was slightly crooked. It looked like the person who wrote it was near the end of his life. "Not bad." Fan Xian furrowed his brows. "Although this will still not be of much use, if this family property lawsuit is to be dragged on, we will have to rely on this." Deng Ziyu replied, "Don't worry, the second and third bureau worked together and used countless pieces of the Ming family's previous master's handwriting. They also used old paper that is difficult to find today. In addition to the craftsmanship and attention to detail, no one should be able to tell it is fake. Of course, the Ming family knows it is fake. The real one has long been destroyed." Fan Xian smiled and said, "To pass off the fake as the genuine, there are indeed many professionals in our council. In the future, if we go into the fake antique business, I think we can make a lot of money. Send it to Xia Qifei in a moment. Tomorrow, when the court opens for trial, if this will is thrown there, the Suzhou government will probably be dumbfounded." The investigation into the Ming family continued, but it did not have any results. For one, the Ming family's efforts to wipe away traces was too deep. For another, there were countless connections in the Jiangnan officialdom that protected them. Naturally, the Suzhou government was one of the links. Although Fan Xian could not directly tear down the Suzhou government, Using a secret Chinpai's will to make the Jiangnan Road officials feel fear and trepidation was still a very easy thing to do. When he was the only one left in the flower hall, Fan Xian took out the 2 letters from his clothes. First, he roughly scanned them and then read them carefully. Wanner's letter basically talked about Jingdo matters. Occasionally, it would mention the situation in the palace. However, the language was a bit cryptic. One of the greatest benefits of having a wife in Jingdo was that she could help Fan Xian immediately understand which way the wind in the palace would blow. The eldest princess returned to Guangxin Palace. The second prince quietly returned to the stage. The crown prince's movements were the most secretive. The old Empress Dowager seemed to be dissatisfied with Fan Xian's arrogance in Jiangnan. The strangest thing was that the emperor was still calm. This goddamned emperor, what good was it for him to make the world so chaotic? Where did his confidence come from? Fan Xian sighed. His fingers gently rubbed the fragrant letter. Suddenly, his longing for Wanner surged up. After not seeing her for a number of months, he knew that his wife was in Jingdo, worried about him and making plans. After he finished reading his father's letter, Fan Xian finally understood De Bao's purpose in coming to Jiangnan. In the letter, Minister Fan urged Fan Xian to find a time to send De Bao to Wuzhou. After resigning, the Prime Minister Lin Ruofu lived in seclusion in Wuzhou. It had been a long time since he had seen his son. If Fan Xian sent De Bao to Wuzhou, he could take the opportunity to visit his scheming father-in-law. This excuse was very good. Even the emperor could not oppose it. Wan Li, brother Xiaojin, the wind blows through the sky, burying love and blood. I'm very happy. Thank you, everyone. I don't know what to say. It seems a little pretentious to ask everyone to spend less money. Hee, I can only say, I will still write novels next year. I will still write novels the year after that. I will still write novels the year after that. I will still write novels the year after that. I will also write novels the year after that. The more I write, the better it will be. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 374. A big piece of gossip had happened in the Suzhou government. The Suzhou people, who loved excitement and did not fear the government, had long received the news. Early in the morning, they swarmed to the door of the yamen, discussing as they waited. What everyone was discussing was the matter that had caused an uproar in Suzhou and had gradually attracted the gazes of all of Jiangnan, the fight for the Ming family property. No one had thought that the 7th young master of the Ming family, who should have died of illness a long time ago, would suddenly appear in front of everyone. Furthermore, with a shake of his body, he had become the commander of the Jiangnan Water Bandits, a famous figure in the underworld. Furthermore, after the palace treasury matter, the 7th young master's identity had changed again. He had become a royal merchant responsible for managing the palace treasury's North Road marketing. However, no matter how his identity had changed, what attracted the most attention was still his identity as a descendant of the Ming family. Xia Qifei had entered the Suzhou government to submit a petition to fight a family property lawsuit. No one knew how the people living in Ming Garden would react. Whose hands would the Ming family property, which could rival a country's wealth, fall into? In the hearts of most people, they were actually partial to the Ming family. For one, the Ming family hid their dark side well and created a clear and bright image in the hearts of the Jiangnan gentry and people. For another, Ming Qingda was the eldest son of the Ming family's eldest son. Even if Xia Qifei was truly the 7th son of the Ming family, according to Qing law and the tradition since ancient times, the family property should be inherited by the legitimate eldest son. Furthermore, who could prove that Xia Qifei was truly Ming Qingqing? At this moment, the outside of the Suzhou government was lively, but inside the yamen was incomparably tense. The Suzhou government Jizhou was half bent over the large table with a headache. He sighed weakly to the advisor beside him and said, "Tell me, what should we do today?" The Ming family was a century-old family. No one knew how many connections they had with the Jiangnan officialdom. They had long been inseparable. If something happened to the Ming family, a small half of the Jiangnan officials would probably follow them in. For an important position like the Suzhou government, the Ming family had already fed the other party full. Xia Qifei was going to enter to fight a family property lawsuit. The Suzhou Zhizhou had to consider the problem from the standpoint of Ming Qingda and the old matriarch, but behind Xia Qifei was the imperial envoy, and not someone the Zhizhou dared to offend. The advisor's face was also full of fear. He anxiously paced around on the ground. Suddenly, he stopped and closed the paper fan in his hand with a snap. "Sir, it's time to be an honest and upright official," the advisor said through gritted teeth, his eyebrows scrunched up into an ugly circle. The Suzhou Zhizhou panicked and said angrily, "What nonsense is this? Have I not always been an upright official?" After saying this, he thought of something. The Zhizhou suddenly became discouraged and said, "This is the Ming family's business. It is not good for me to stay out of it. After all, in the past, it was because of the old matriarch that I was able to sit in this position." The advisor knew that the old master had misunderstood his meaning, and quickly went forward to say a few words. He lowered his voice and explained, "Old master, have you seen anyone from the Ming family say anything these 2 days?" The Suzhou Zhizhou paused. He thought for a moment and then said strangely, "Yes, the Ming family has never sent anyone to communicate with me." The advisor smiled sinisterly and said, "It looks like the Ming family has a card up their sleeve. They know that no matter how this case is fought and what Xia Qifei has in his hands, the Ming family's enormous family property will still only belong to the old Ming master, since the Ming family is not worried. Naturally, they have the confidence to win. Why worry for them?" The Suzhou Zhizhou lowered his head slightly and asked in a very low voice, "Then, according to you, what should I do?" This advisor specialized in criminal names and was extremely familiar with Qing law. With a swish, he opened his fan and proudly said, "Regardless of whether or not Xia Qifei can find the old man from back then and prove his past, even if he is truly the seventh son of the Ming family, according to Qing law, he will not have a share in this family property. Since you don't want to offend either side, and the Ming family is currently protected by Qing law, then what are you worried about? Today, you only need to report it to the public and judge the case according to Qing law. Presumably, the imperial envoy will not be able to blame you." Who knew how many pairs of eyes were watching this case that had shocked Jiangnan? The Suzhou Zhizhou furrowed his brows and thought for a long time. He felt that this was the only way. Reporting the case to the public and deciding according to the law, he could not offend Fan Xian, and he could silently watch the Ming family succeed. He could also erect an official's reputation. It seemed to be a three-way win situation. Thinking of this, the Zhizhou finally relaxed and let out a long breath. So it is like this. Not moving is moving. At this moment, the broken drum outside the yamen began to beat. The Zhizhou furrowed his brows and cursed, "This Xia water bandit is truly impatient." Although he said this, he did not dare slight it. He tidied up his official robes, piled on a kind smile within his dignity, and walked out of the study toward the court. Arriving at the court, one could only hear a clamor outside the manor. A wave of murderous roars rose up and finally suppressed the clamor of the Suzhou people outside. The Zhizhou narrowed his eyes and looked down the hall. With some surprise, he found that Xia Qifei had come to the hall alone. He had not brought anyone else with him. It looked like the imperial envoy had not sent anyone to help Xia Qifei. "Who is below? Commoner Xia Qifei? What matter do you have to report?" Xia Qifei was silent for a moment. His mind wandered and, for a moment, forgot to reply. He was wearing a pure green cotton robe. The beard on his chin had been shaved cleanly, revealing his green skin. He looked full of valiance and full of vigor. The hands that were exposed outside his sleeves were trembling slightly. It looked like the matter today was indeed of great significance to the seventh young master of the Ming dynasty. The Zhizhou glanced at him with some disgust. He felt that this person standing proudly in the court was a significant challenge to his authority. Furthermore, he dared to not kneel in front of his face. He was just about to fly into a rage when he found his sleeve being tugged on by the advisor. The advisor said in a quiet voice, Fan, don't worry about small matters." The Zhizhou was startled and thought about it. What was the point in bothering about such small matters? At this moment, Xia Qifei finally opened his mouth in a heavy voice. He raised his hands and said in a clear voice, "Commoner Xia Qifei, surnamed Ming, given name Qingcheng. I am the seventh son of the old Ming master of the Suzhou Ming family. Ever since I was a child, I was chased out of the family by a fierce woman and have wandered from place to place until now. I have lost my parents and lost my home. Today, I have no choice but to enter the court to sue the old Ming matriarch of the Suzhou Ming family and the head of the eldest branch, Ming Qingda, for colluding with bandits, harming lives, and stealing my family's property. I ask the just and upright old master to seek justice for this commoner." With these words, the entire courtyard burst into an uproar. Everyone knew that Xia Qifei had come to steal the family property, but no one had thought that the moment he opened his mouth, he would directly point out that the old Ming matriarch and Ming Qingda had once tried to harm people's lives. Each word struck the heart. Furthermore, in his words, he used fierce women and bandits without leaving any leeway. The commoners outside the yamen began to clamor. In their hearts, the old Ming matriarch was a kind old woman who had done countless good deeds over the years. How could she have anything to do with a fierce woman? In reality, these people had faintly guessed that the strange disappearance of the seventh young master of the Ming family back then probably had something to do with the old Ming matriarch and the present master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda. However, people were always willing to believe things they believed and things they had already convinced themselves of. Thus, they all responded to Ming Qingda's accusation with boos. The Suzhou Zhizhou also furrowed his brows and said with disgust, "This is a serious matter. Words cannot be careful. Where is the petition?" Xia Qifei took out the petition from his clothes and handed it with both hands to the advisor in the lower court to pass on. After the advisor handed the petition to the Zhizhou, the two of them gathered together to read it. They felt a great shock in their hearts. This petition was beautifully written and incisive. Each word pointed directly at the old Ming matriarch. Furthermore, it cleverly avoided the rules of Qing law in this area. It only focused on the old Ming master's will. As for Xia Qifei's pitiful wandering life these years, it did not spare the pen and ink. It moved everyone who saw it. The Zhizhou was moved, but he was laughing coldly in his heart. He narrowed his eyes and thought that this kind of writing was good for a story, but it was useless for a lawsuit. He slammed down on the gavel and shouted in a stern voice, "Xia Qifei, do you have proof to present?" Xia Qifei said with a calm expression, "The Ming family has not arrived. Why are you so anxious?" Looking at Xia Qifei's calm and confident expression, the Zhizhou furrowed his brows and thought to himself, did the other party actually have some fatal weapon in his hands? He thought for a moment and discussed it with the advisor. He then sent someone to invite the Ming family to come forward to answer the lawsuit. According to the notes on the side of the Qing law, such a civil lawsuit did not require the defendant to come forward to answer. However, the matter being fought today was too big. The powers behind both sides were too powerful, and the influence in the Jiangnan area was too great. The Suzhou Zhizhou did not dare to be too careless. In any case, he knew the Ming family would not stay out of it, so he sent someone to invite them. As expected, the moment the bailiffs left, the Ming family followed in. It looked like the Ming family had long prepared someone to answer the lawsuit and were just waiting for this sure-win battle. Seeing the newcomer, the Suzhou Zhizhou furrowed his brows and said in a cold voice, "Who are you?" The elegant young master smiled slightly and bowed. "I, Ming Lansher, pay my respects to you, sir." This young master of the Ming family knew that the Suzhou Zhizhou was acting right now. He wanted to play the role of an upright and plain-spoken person in front of the people, which was why his words were so cold. Usually this Zhizhou was much more friendly in front of him. However, after the Ming family's analysis these few days, They had determined that this property lawsuit was a sure-win situation. Thus, Ming Lansher understood the Suzhou Zhizhou's thoughts and did not mind. The Suzhou Zhizhou said, "The old Ming master has been unwell recently. As the eldest grandson of the eldest branch, it is reasonable for you to answer this matter. Someone, bring the complaint paper to Ming Lansher to take a look." The advisor took the complaint paper away. Unexpectedly, Ming Lansher did not accept it. On the contrary, he smiled slightly and bowed. "Sir, the Ming family is not an evil person who likes litigation, so we do not understand the entanglement in this matter. Thus, we have invited a litigation master to help us." After he said this, he glanced to the side. The so-called evil person who likes litigation was naturally directed at Xia Qifei, who was standing to the side. Xia Qifei did not have any reaction. He also did not glance at his nephew. Following Ming Lansher's words, a person flashed in from behind and accepted the complaint paper the advisor handed over with both hands. He smiled ingratiatingly. When the Suzhou Zhizhou and advisor saw this person, their slightly worried hearts immediately relaxed. This litigation master was Chen Wuchang. He was the most famous litigation master in the Jiangnan area, or perhaps the most infamous litigation master. He was on good terms with the provincial government. When he fought a lawsuit, he could always turn black into white, the dead into alive, and a man into a woman. He had a glib tongue and walked the world with Qing law in his hands. He had never lost. The Ming family had brought out this Chen Wuchang. They also had the protection of the Qing law regarding the inheritance of the eldest son. There was no way they would lose this property lawsuit. Chen Wuchang held Xia Qifei's complaint paper and looked at it closely. Involuntarily, a cold and disdainful smile appeared at the corners of his lips. He looked down on the other party, and even the imperial envoy behind him. He cleared his throat and smiled frivolously. What a moving story, only, I don't know, what does Leader Xia's story have to do with the Ming family? This litigation master called Xia Qifei Leader Xia because he wanted to influence public opinion and let the people listening remember that this Xia Qifei was the leader of the underworld who killed people like flies on rivers and lakes. Xia Qifei's face was expressionless. It is all about the story of the Ming family, these 20 years. What do you think it has to do with the Ming family? Chen Wuchang suddenly laughed coldly and mockingly said, "Sir Xia is truly laughable. If you say it is the Ming family story, then it is the Ming family story. If you say you are the seventh master of the Ming family, then it is the seventh master of the Ming family." He raised his hands to the Suzhou Zhizhou in the court and smiled. "Sir, this case is too absurd. There is truly no need to continue." The Suzhou Zhizhou faked a frown and said, "Why are you speaking so rashly?" Chen Wuchang smiled and said, "There is no evidence at all, yet you call yourself the seventh son of the Ming family, sir. If there is another person calling himself the seventh son of the Ming family, then what? Everyone in Jiangnan knows that the old master of the Ming family had 7 sons and 4 daughters. The 7th son was born to a concubine. He was ill and weak at a young age. Over a decade ago, he unfortunately contracted a disease and died. How could there be another 7th son of the Ming family now? If we allow someone to call themselves a descendant of the Ming family to go to court, slander the Ming family's reputation, and slander the old Ming matriarch and master's pure name, where is the justice in this world?" He looked at Xia Qifei and smiled slightly. Of course, now everyone knows that Leader Xia is also not a normal person. However, I am very curious. After the palace treasury bidding, Leader Xia made such a preposterous move. I wonder, why exactly? Is there some sinister motive behind it that cannot be revealed to others? This most famous litigator in Jiangnan completely felt that the case today was too unchallenging, so he attacked fiercely from the get-go. He made a great deal of criticism. Gazing at Xia Qifei, he shook his head and said, "If you don't have evidence, then don't randomly file a lawsuit. If you don't have witnesses, then don't randomly accuse others. Leader Xia, today you have disgraced the Ming family's reputation. In a moment, I will definitely charge you with the crime of false accusation." The people who had personally witnessed the old Ming matriarch killing Xia Qifei's mother and chasing Xia Qifei away had long been silenced in these dozen years. It was impossible for Xia Qifei to have any evidence or witnesses on hand, so the Ming family was very confident. It was at this moment that a slippery and lazy voice that made one's skin crawl came from outside the Suzhou Yamen. Who says you can't go to court without evidence? Who says you can't sue for murder without witnesses? In the first year of the Qing calendar, the case of a concubine killing her husband in Dingzhou. The wife reported it without evidence. Later, a saber was found in the stables, and the case was solved. The Ministry of Justice's Spring Scroll, File 137, is an example of the king of the Song dynasty in Nanyue. It clearly states that civil cases are divided into 3 classes. If it involves a dispute of 10,000 coins or more, it will not be punished. There is no need for complete evidence. The Ming family's wealth is more than 10,000 coins. With 2 previous cases, why can't this case be fought? For things like evidence after it is reported, the government will naturally investigate the scene and search for evidence. Why are you in such a rush, litigator? Besides, who says Sir Xia doesn't have evidence? The person who walked in from outside the yamen wore scholarly robes and held a golden fan in his hand. He was incomparably ostentatious and arrogant. A string of words, citing cases, and using the records of the Ministry of Justice, although it was a bit unreasonable, it successfully suppressed the Ming family's overbearing aura and drew everyone's gaze to him. The Suzhou Zhizhou stroked his beard angrily and said, "Who are you? You dare to come to court without being summoned? Men, beat him up." The man wearing scholarly robes stuck his alloy fan behind him and raised his hands in a respectful bow toward the court. "Sir, you cannot beat him." After saying this, he took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and waved it in the air. With a cheeky smile, he said, "I am like Sir Chen Buchang, also a litigation master. However, I am a litigation master hired by Sir Xia Qifei. I have come late. Please forgive me and allow me to stand in court with my body intact and speak to the Ming family. This case has not even been tried, yet you have knocked out a litigation master on one side. If this matter gets out, I'm afraid it will damage your reputation." Everyone paused. Only now did they realize that the person who had come was Xia Qifei's litigation master. Xia Qifei smiled bitterly and thought to himself, why did the imperial envoy send him such a troublemaker? The Suzhou Zhizhou choked on the words of this litigation master. He was very angry, but he didn't actually hit him. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain to the imperial envoy. For a moment, he couldn't speak. But Chen Buchang's eyes lit up. Staring at the litigation master with a golden fan on his back, he felt that he had finally met an opponent with a sharp tongue. Feeling slightly excited, he also stuck his fan behind him and opened his mouth to say, "The 2 cases you mentioned earlier are special cases, particularly the spring file of the Ministry of Justice. It is only for the reference of the Supreme Court and the Ministry of Justice in the capital. It has never involved the judgment of a local case." The person shook his head and said, "Not so. In the 4th year of Daxing, the previous Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, who was then the judge in Suzhou, used this spring file to judge a property case. How can it not be involved?" Chen Buchang's heart tightened. He had no impression of the case the other person was talking about. Either the other person was talking nonsense, or the other person's familiarity with Qing law and precedent was far above his own. He only heard the person continue to smile slightly and say, "Brother Buchang, don't say things like Qing law does not follow precedent. Whether or not precedent is used is not restricted by the Qing law. It is all up to the thoughts of the chief official." He raised his hand in an ingratiating bow toward the Suzhou Zhizhou, but the Suzhou Zhizhou was cursing in his heart. He knew that the words, "up to the thoughts of the chief official," had forced him to Dong Mountain. He had no choice but to make this property case. Who exactly was this litigation master? Chen Buchang and Ming Lanshe met each other's eyes. They both felt it was strange. Where did such a shameless litigation master come from in Jiangnan? The Suzhou Zhizhou finally couldn't resist asking, "Dare I ask, what exactly is the sir's name?" Xia Qifei also looked at his litigation master. He raised his hands and smiled. I am Song Shuren. I am a member of the Jingdo Litigation Masters Guild. The Ministry of Justice has specially granted permission to move files. Today, I have specially come to Jiangnan to have the honor of participating in the largest property case in history. Song Shuren. The Suzhou Zhizhou immediately had thoughts of escaping. Ming Lansher also felt his mouth go dry, and Chen Wuchang's eyes were wide. What kind of person was Song Shuren? He was the most famous litigation master in Jingdo, or perhaps the most famous litigation master in the entire Qing kingdom. Chen Wuchang's reputation was only in Jiangnan, but this Song Shuren was famous throughout the world for being clever, crafty, and difficult to provoke. From the beginning of his career, he had relied on the study of Qing law from a young age to make countless officials lose face and countless victims cry wretchedly. Even the people of Suzhou had heard of Song Shuren's infamous name. Hearing him announce his name, a commotion broke out outside the yamen. Everyone knew that today's show was going to be even better. Ming Lansher glanced worriedly at Chen Wuchang. After a moment of panic, Chen Wuchang recovered his calm. Narrowing his eyes, a powerful fighting spirit suddenly exploded from his body. With a cold smile, he said, "Young master, don't worry. I have never lost a lawsuit, but Song Shuren has lost before." However, Chen Wuchang seemed to have forgotten an important point. The only lawsuit Song Shuren had lost in his life was the case of the illegitimate son of the Count of Nan beating Guobaoquan with a black fist. Song Shuren had only lost to Fan Xian once. Since they were going to fight a family property lawsuit, the first thing they had to confirm was Xia Qifei's true identity and whether or not he was the seventh son of the old Ming master. Regarding this point, Chen Wuchang's position was very stable. If the other party could not prove this matter, he would not bother to argue about anything else. Only in this way could they not give the infamous Song Shuren an opportunity to seize a loophole on their side. The Suzhou Zhizhou also furrowed his brows and asked Xia Qifei's side to provide concrete evidence to prove his identity. Song Shuren was no longer as relaxed as before. Shaking his head at Xia Qifei, he called out the first witness on his side. This witness was a midwife. She was already very old and even walked shakily. She walked to the front of the court and gasped for breath as she confirmed that she had helped the old Ming master's concubine give birth. The newborn baby had a green birthmark on the back of his waist. Xia Qifei took off his clothes in court. There was indeed a green mark on the back of his waist. Chen Wuchang furrowed his brows and gritted his teeth. In a low voice, he said to Ming Lansher, "Why didn't you say this yesterday?" Ming Lansher's teeth made a crunching sound and he said in a low voice with great anger, "This midwife is fake. The one from back then died of illness 2 years ago." Chen Wuchang sighed sorrowfully. Even if they knew the midwife was fake, how could they prove it? The midwife looked confused, but in the questions and answers earlier, she had clearly remembered the location of the Ming garden. The old Ming master's appearance, the concubine's clothing, and the rooms were all correct. In the eyes of a bystander, this midwife could not be any more real. Damn, the Overwatch Council was indeed skilled at falsifying. On the last day of 2007, I am slightly moved but mostly happy. I hope everyone can sweep away the bad things of the past, such as me often making mistakes and writing methane as a disgraceful thing. Believe me, it is a typo. Please remember those beautiful and happy memories, such as how I am bright and pure. Tomorrow is a new year. I wish everyone good health, good luck in everything, and a long life for the elders in your families. Chapter 375. Naturally, the Ming family would not be thrown into confusion by a midwife who came out of nowhere. Chen Wuchang was also an eloquent person. Grabbing the birthmark and the midwife's age, the evidence could not be completely trusted. He attacked fiercely. In any case, they could not just admit to it. With Xia Qifei's past, it would not be enough if there was only this false evidence. Furthermore, the Suzhou government's Zhizhou and Jiangnan road officials were all on the Ming family's side. Song Shuren flew into a rage. He thought to himself that the Jiangnan people were indeed unruly people. He had worked so hard to design this midwife, yet the other party refused to admit it. However, looking at the Suzhou Zhizhou's expression and words, Song Shuren knew that the matter involved the Ming family's property. His side's evidence was indeed a bit weak and not very persuasive. However, Song Shuren was full of confidence. He had discovered the Suzhou government's secret bias and was not willing to accept his argument. Inevitably, he used his own annoying sharp tongue to wantonly belittle the Ming family. He also secretly stabbed the Suzhou government a few times. His words were filled with mockery and sarcasm. In any case, he was a famous person in Jingdou and didn't care about the methods of the Jiangnan nobles. Relying on Sir Fan Jr.'s support, he was very daring. The Suzhou Zhizhou sitting with Ming Lanshe and Chen Buchang was not in a rush. He watched with a smile as this world-famous litigator performed and listened to the saliva flying around the court. Although he hated this bastard in his heart, he forcefully suppressed it. Sir Song, if you want to prove that Xia Qifei was the seventh son of the old Ming master, do you have any other evidence? The Suzhou Zhizhou clenched his fist in his sleeve and asked with furrowed brows. Sir, the midwife earlier clearly remembered it clearly. Why can it not be used as evidence? Song Shuren's feet were uncrossed, and he stood in the court like an ace. Brother Song's words are not appropriate. Chen Buchang bowed to the side. That old woman's movements are already difficult, and her cheeks are weak. She is already a person about to die. This old and muddle-headed person, how can her words be accurate? Furthermore, she does remember the Ming family's layout clearly, but who knows if someone with ulterior motives told her what happened back then and then had her remember and come to frame us? Song Shuren narrowed his eyes and said, What a shameless frame. Chen Buchang was slightly angered. He thought to himself, You guys can even do such a shameless thing, but can't I even say it? Song Shuren couldn't be bothered to deal with him anymore. He directly asked the people in the hall, Sir, do you also say the same thing? The commoners outside the hall had already mostly believed in Xia Qifei's past. After all, the midwife's acting skills were truly exquisite. The surrounding crowd could see that the Suzhou Zhizhou and the Ming family were probably going to deny it to the death. Some of the more lively ones began to cheer. However, most people were still silent. After all, in their hearts, they were still partial to the Ming family. In particular, Xia Qifei seemed to have a power from Jingdou behind him. The Jiangnan people were very opposed to this kind of situation. The Suzhou Zhizhou's old face blushed slightly. He knew that it was not appropriate to deny the midwife's confession to the death. Looking at Ming Lanshe's gaze, he knew he could only continue like this. He cleared his throat and said, That midwife is indeed old and muddle-headed. The right to accept the truth is still in my hands. If it was a common case, then it would not be inappropriate for Sir Song to say it. However, Sir mentioned earlier that the Ministry of Justice is classified as third class. This matter of the Ming family property is, without question, a first-class case. If there is no more detailed and reliable evidence, I truly cannot judge the case. Song Shuren had been waiting for these words. He furrowed his brows slightly and pretended to be disappointed. In a sharp voice, he said, Sir, this won't do. The matter has been so long ago. Where can we find other evidence? I have already found a witness. If you say it won't do, then what kind of evidence do you need? The Suzhou Zhizhou's heart was slightly happy. No matter how arrogant and famous Song Shuren was, in court, he would still be needed like dough by us officials. No matter what kind of witness he brought up, I would always find a way to not accept it. Hearing Song Shuren's panicked question, he unconsciously said, Witness and material evidence are both present before the case can be decided. Song Shuren did not wait for him to continue. His lips parted and words shot out like a cannon. Sir? Who will judge the case? Naturally, it will be me. Since it is you who will judge the case, dare I ask what is material evidence? Song Shuren was overbearing and did not give the Suzhou Zhizhou any more time to react. The Suzhou Zhizhou was slightly startled and hesitated to speak. Song Shuren raised his hands in a salute and stared straight into the other's eyes. Just what is material evidence? The Suzhou Zhizhou jumped in fright at his imposing manner. It was as if he had returned to many years ago when he was taking the law exam. He unconsciously replied, "Traces, murder weapon, documentary evidence." Documentary evidence?
Good.
Song Shuren's eyes narrowed into crescents. He gave a great compliment and said, "Sir's wise." The Suzhou Zhizhou was startled again. He had no idea where he was wise. Hesitantly, he opened his mouth and asked, "Sir Song." Song Shuren still did not give him a chance to finish his sentence. In a rush, he asked, "Sir, if there is documentary evidence, can it be used as proof?" "Naturally, it can." Song Shuren once again cut him off. "If there is documentary evidence, you cannot deny it." The Suzhou Zhizhou angrily nodded and said, "What are you saying? I am also someone familiar with Qing law. How can I not know the power of documentary evidence? You, a litigation master, speak too rudely. If you can bring out documentary evidence, naturally it will be more trustworthy than that midwife earlier." After these words were said, the Suzhou Zhizhou suddenly felt that he had said something wrong. Why did he suddenly become so talkative? He unconsciously looked down the hall and saw Ming Lansher and Chen Wuchang's shock and a glimmer of disappointment. The litigation master called Song Shuren had a pleased and evil smile on his face. Song Shuren repeatedly cut off the Suzhou Zhizhou's words and completely blocked the response he had thought of. In the end, he suddenly gave an opening. After a few provocations, he had the Zhizhou follow his intentions and confirm the importance of documentary evidence in front of everyone before he presented his evidence. This was to prevent the shameless scene of him not admitting it again later. In fact, this was just a very superficial psychological and verbal skill in debating. It was like dangling a sausage in front of a dog, but refusing to let it take a bite. In the end, when you stuffed a banana in front of it, the dog would be overjoyed and eat it all, forgetting that it originally wanted to eat the sausage and not the banana. Chen Wuchang found that the Zhizhou had fallen for Song Shuren's trick and sighed to himself. Earlier, he didn't have a chance to interrupt because Song Shuren spoke too quickly. Furthermore, his arrogant and shameless tone was indeed easy to anger. He and Ming Lansher met each other's eyes and shook their heads helplessly. They felt a glimmer of confusion in their hearts. Just what kind of documentary evidence did he have in his hands that could prove Xia Qifei's past? The Suzhou Zhizhou knew he had been played by Song Shuren. Looking at that person's hateful, smiling face, he wanted to order someone to beat him up. However, he could not do so now. He could only ask in a heavy voice, "Since you have documentary evidence, why didn't you present it earlier?" Song Shuren bowed respectfully and said, "I will present it now." The Zhizhou smiled coldly and said, "If your documentary evidence has no effect, don't blame me for closing the case." Song Shuren smiled darkly and said, "Sir, don't worry. Although this documentary evidence is old, it is a dead object. It will not go senile, don't worry, sir." The Suzhou Zhizhou choked unhappily. Song Shuren moved closer to Xia Qifei's ear and said something. Xia Qifei furrowed his brows slightly, as if he had not thought he would have to take out that thing so quickly. It looked like proving his past was indeed a very difficult matter. He took out the little box from his clothes and carefully handed it to the advisor. His eyes kept staring at the advisor's hand holding the box, as if he was afraid someone would take the box away in broad daylight. Looking at Xia Qifei's cautious expression, Chen Wuchang furrowed his brows and moved closer to Ming Lansher's ear to ask, "Young master, can you guess what it is?" Ming Lansher's expression was slightly confused. Suzhou was not like Jingdo. There was no such thing as birth papers. What exactly was this documentary evidence? At this time, the Suzhou Zhizhou had already opened the box. He and the advisor scanned it together, and their expressions immediately changed. Ming Lansher and Chen Wuchang were startled. The Suzhou Zhizhou swept a complicated gaze over Ming Lansher. Song Shuren's face was full of smiles. He was incomparably calm, but he raised his voice an octave and said in a clear voice, "This documentary evidence is the will the old Ming master personally wrote. The will clearly states that all of the Ming family property will be left to the seventh son, Ming Qingcheng. This will has always been kept in Sir Xia's hands. This is enough to prove that Sir Xia is the seventh son of the Ming family. Without waiting for everyone to wake from their shock, Song Shuren changed the topic and rushed to patch it up. Gazing at the Suzhou Zhizhou, he smiled coldly and said, "Of course, some stubborn and stupid people can say that Sir Xia accidentally picked up this will and came to pretend to be a descendant of the Ming family. However, with the midwife in front and the documentary evidence in the back, if there is still someone who dares to frame him so openly, the eyes of the people are not blind, and it's not like they don't have brains. Who among the officials of the Qing court and the people of Jiangnan would believe it? The will of the old Ming master." The wind in the court changed abruptly. The people watching outside the yamen clamored. In the court, Ming Lanshi and Chen Wuchang seemed to have been struck by lightning and stood dumbly. Ming Lanshi's face was full of shock as he muttered to himself, "Impossible. When did grandfather write a will? This must be fake." Song Shuren looked at the young master of the Ming family from the side and smiled insincerely. As expected, someone didn't even look at it and already said it was fake. Is young Master Ming an immortal? Ming Lanshi was still in a state of shock. Hearing Song Shuren's words, he angrily waved his sleeve and said, "This will must be fake." Hearing his words, Song Shuren felt proud in his heart. He knew that the situation he was most worried about had not happened. He had put in a timely patch. If the other party did not struggle with the authenticity of the will, and did as he said earlier and insisted that Xia Qifei had picked up this will and was now pretending to be the seventh young master of the Ming family to steal the family property, that would have been the most difficult to deal with. If the other party continued to be shameless to the end, he would truly have no way of dealing with it. Now, the young master of the Ming family, in his shock, only cared about whether the will was real or fake and did not accuse Xia Qifei of picking up the will to pretend to be him. Thus, as long as he could prove that the will was real, then the fact that Xia Qifei was the seventh young master of the Ming family could be confirmed. Song Shuren gently let out a breath. It looked like he was fooling around in court, but every word he said and the order of his plan had been carefully thought out. Only by doing this could he lead this difficult situation in the direction he wanted it to go. The best litigation master in the Qing kingdom indeed lived up to his reputation. The Suzhou Zhizhou's face was ashen. He waved his hand for the litigation masters on both sides to come closer to the table and said, "The written evidence is here, but we don't know if it is real or fake." It was destined that Song Shuren would not let this Zhizhou be happy today. He cut him off and said, "Sir, whether it is real or fake, we will know once we examine it." "What do you mean we don't know?" Chen Wuchang was, after all, a famous litigation master in Jiangnan. He had long shaken off his earlier shock and knew that Song Shuren was using the tactic of beating the grass to scare the snake. He smiled slightly and said, "Sir, since the other party says this is the will of the old Ming master, then it must be examined. At this moment, the young master of the Ming family is present. Why not have him come and take a look?" He turned to Song Shuren and warmly said, "Sir Song, you don't have any objections, right? As long as the young master doesn't go crazy and swallow the will, what harm is there in looking?" Song Shuren narrowed his eyes and smiled sinisterly. Brother Chen's ability to remain calm is indeed impressive. Likewise, Chen Wuchang replied with a slight smile. The Suzhou Zhizhou did not understand what these two litigation masters were praising each other about. Only Song Shuren and Chen Wuchang knew that since it was a family property lawsuit, proving Xia Qifei's identity was only a primer. The most important part was where that enormous family property belonged. Even if the will that Xia Qifei took out was real, according to Qing law, the Ming family could still stand in an invincible position. Thus, Chen Wuchang was not panicked, but Song Shuren was not happy. They both knew that the long road was still ahead. At this time, Ming Lanshi had already walked over and was examining the will on the table with an uneasy expression. In the Ming garden, there were still many of the old Ming master's handwriting. The descendants of the Ming family read them every day and had long memorized them. Thus, When Ming Lansher saw the thin and dry handwriting on the will, he knew it was indeed written by his grandfather. And the paper used for the will was indeed the old Ming master's favorite Qingzhou paper. Ming Lansher's expression was slightly frightened. He bowed to the Zhizhou and retreated. Chun Buchang moved closer to his ear and said in a quiet voice, "Is it real or fake?" Ming Lansher furrowed his brows and said, "I'm afraid it is real." However, this young Master Ming had, after all, started to help the family take care of business these years. His will had been tempered to be firm and resolute. However, in an instant, he felt a glimmer of strangeness. He then thought of some of the secrets his father had once revealed. His expression became strange. Lowering his voice, he said, "No, this is fake." Chun Buchang said with a strange expression, "Oh, how do you judge?" Ming Lansher gritted his teeth and said darkly, "My family's old ancestors' methods, if she wanted to act back then, why would she have left behind a will?" Chun Buchang was startled. He knew that the other party was talking about the old Ming matriarch. Thinking about it, it was indeed so. If the old Ming matriarch had wanted to take the family property, kill people, and expel the family, the first thing she would have done would have been to deal with the matter of the will. Logically speaking, this will could not have been left in this world. Then this will... He furrowed his brows. Ming Lansher said gloomily, "Just like that midwife, it's probably a fake made by the Overwatch Council." Only now did the Ming family realize with shock how much effort the Overwatch Council behind Xia Qifei had put into this matter. That perfectly forged will could not have been made so meticulously without a few months of time. Just the age of the paper and the choice of material were all complicated matters. This kind of Qingzhou paper had already stopped production 10 years ago. Who knew the Overwatch Council would still be able to find it? Furthermore, the methods the Overwatch Council used were powerful enough. The lawsuit method they used was shameless to the extreme. They had been faking it all the way to the end. Was there still justice in this world? Ming Lansher thought sorrowfully. He couldn't help but think of a person. That young and delicate imperial envoy seemed to be standing somewhere, looking at him with a warm smile on his face. His lips were slightly parted, as if he was about to eat a feast. Behind the scenes, Sir Fan Jr. was in charge. Since the will had appeared, it had to be checked for authenticity. The Suzhou government had already sent people to the Ming garden to compare the handwriting with the old Ming master's handwriting. At the same time, according to Song Shuren's seemingly fair opinion, they had gone to the Palace Treasury Transport Company to retrieve the signature of the bidding document from that year. At the same time, they had invited the officials of the Suzhou branch of the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to come and check the age of the will and the paper used. Everyone knew that the Overwatch Council was best at doing this kind of work. Since they were good at making fakes, they were also good at discerning fakes. However, it was a fake the Overwatch Council had made. Asking the Overwatch Council to come and check it was like asking a wolf to solve the missing sheep case. The Suzhou Zhizhou cursed loudly in his heart, but he didn't dare speak badly of the Overwatch Council in front of everyone. He could only agree to this suggestion. At the same time, he had other thoughts. He sent someone else to invite the patrolling imperial censor and the Jiangnan governor's manor to invite the powerful criminal teacher to judge the authenticity of the will. Because of the appearance of the will, the Suzhou government's investigation temporarily came to a halt. Checking wills always took time, so the surrounding commoners quickly went to the tea shops to buy tea and cakes. After satisfying their hunger and thirst, they rushed back to watch the show. However, when those people came back, they found that the best spots had already been taken by the hungry spectators. They could only curse quietly, but they couldn't take it back. The Ming family had long sent over a box of food. Ming Lansher ate without tasting it. Chun Buchang said something by his ear, and only then did Ming Lansher's spirits improve. On the other side, Hua Garden did not hide anything and brought over a box of food for Xia Qifei. There were very few people there. Only Song Shuren and Xia Qifei were eating. Song Shuren glanced at the Ming family and quietly said to Xia Qifei, "Once the will appears, Master Xia's past will be made clear." The excitement in Xia Qifei's eyes was immediately hidden. He gratefully said, "Thank you for your trouble, sir." However, Song Shuren said seriously, "Confirming Master Xia's past as a descendant of the Ming family does not mean you can take back what belongs to you." Xia Qifei understood what he meant. Song Shuren sighed and said, "The Qing laws are strict and follow scriptures. In the Qing laws, the rules regarding inheritance of family property are too rigid. The other party is the eldest son of the eldest branch and has an absolute advantage. Even if you have the will of the old Ming master in your hands, it is impossible for the government to award the Ming family property to you." Furthermore, these Jiangnan Road officials looking at it, they all listened to the Ming family. Xia Qifei nodded slightly and said with a determined expression, "If I can clear my name today, it will be an unexpected joy. As for the matter of the family property, everything will be as you say. Sir has also said that this matter cannot be rushed. As long as the will is confirmed, it is fine not to fight this case." Song Shuren smiled slightly and shook his head. "We have to continue fighting. Even if we know we cannot win in the end, we still have to continue fighting. We have to beat the Ming family until they are badly battered and powerless to respond. We have to drag out the Ming family and embarrass them. I have this ability." This litigation master spoke easily and confidently, but in reality, he had a belly full of complaints. He had been summoned all the way to Jiangnan by that Sir Fan Jr., who knew that he was going to fight a case that he was certain to lose. Furthermore, Fan Xian had ordered him to drag out the process of this lawsuit as long as possible. In this life, Song Shuren had only lost to Fan Xian once in court. Now he was going to lose a second time because of Fan Xian. When he thought of it, he was full of resentment. But there was nothing he could do. Who asked him to vote for Sir Fan Jr.? Who asked him to be generous? In the afternoon, a joint inspection team consisting of officials from the Overwatch Council, Suzhou Government, Imperial Censorate, and the Jiangnan Governor's Manners Criminal Division studied the yellowed paper for a long time. First, it was to compare the handwriting and signature. The old Ming master's thin and withered handwriting was extremely difficult to imitate. Furthermore, his personal writing habits, such as the fact that he would drag at the end of his writing, all of this was fully displayed in this will. Furthermore, the paper used was indeed Qingzhou paper that had long stopped production. The advisor of the Ministry of Justice determined from the degree of yellowing and the degree of dampness that the time the will was written was very close to the year Xia Qifei claimed. The tone and use of words in the will were also completely in harmony with when the old Ming master was alive. Most importantly, after the seal was compared to the old Ming master's seal that Ming Garden had brought, it was not the slightest bit different. However, it was this lack of difference that made the experienced old official in the Jiangnan governor's manner feel a glimmer of strangeness. A will had been stored for a dozen years. The color of the seal was indeed old and faint, but the fine threads were still not the slightest bit different from the current seal. This was too strange. However, this old official also understood that this matter was very complicated. Furthermore, this point could not be considered suspicious, so he did not pay too much attention to it. As for the officials of the Suzhou government and Imperial Censorate, they wholeheartedly wanted to prove that this will was fake. In the end, they even used a large piece of glass that was a specialty of the palace treasury but still could not find a single flaw. After the officials discussed it for a while, they came to a consensus. The Suzhou Zhizhou had no choice but to announce in the court that the will was real. Naturally, Xia Qifei was also the seventh young master of the Ming family who should have died a long time ago, Ming Qingcheng. On the first day of 2008, I was going to write something but decided against it after thinking about it. I won't say too much nonsense. I just wish everyone a happy new year and live happily. Casting more monthly votes is good for the body and mind. Haha, last month, I was 4th in the monthly votes. It has nothing to do with my ability to pull votes. Everyone knows that my ability in this area is very poor. It was all because everyone gave me face and gave me an extra 3,000 yuan as a bonus to buy a new mobile phone, a Nokia 6300, a subpar product. I also had to buy a Sony Ericsson 608C for my mother because it has handwriting so she can learn to send text messages, Oh, the happy 3,000 yuan is all from everyone, my sincere thanks. Last night I drank 3 bottles of beer and fainted for a long time. Today I woke up late. This shows that I'm already old. During the spring festival in February, I might have to ask everyone for some time off because I have to go back to my hometown to warm my uncle's grave. I also have to go back to the village. The mountain roads are difficult, so I'm afraid I won't be able to work during those days. I'll say this in advance. Asking for leave awaits approval. Happy New Year, enough nonsense. I said less nonsense, but still so much nonsense. Of course, this paragraph doesn't count. I wish everyone a Happy New Year, sincerely. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please go to www.cmfu.com.
There are more chapters.
Support the author. Support the original reading. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.